Tonight we have 40 allegedly true stories, creepy encounters, home break-ins, stalkers, and more. A huge thank you to everyone who either sent in a story or allowed me to share their story upon request. If you have a story of your own, it can be sent to my subreddit, reddit.com/r/slumberreads. Likes and comments are always appreciated if you enjoy. Also, I know this is a wild goal, but I'm trying to reach 100,000 subscribers. So if you are new here, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. I usually post multiple videos a day, and I always work my hardest to bring the best and most consistent content possible. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. To start things off, this incident occurred in a small town community, where it's not really crime-ridden or exactly dangerous. Around this time last year, I was working full-time at a little Japanese retailer shop at the mall near my house. My schedule fluctuated, but the majority of my shifts were closing shifts. I preferred this because it gave me enough time to sleep in, make myself a lunch, catch the bus, get to the mall a bit earlier to buy snacks and a drink, before I begin my dreaded 8.5-hour shift. On one particular day, as I was getting ready to walk to the bus stop, I saw a big commotion going on right across from my house, at the town hall. I crossed the street, right in time before several other police cars and an ambulance rushed by, sirens wailing so loud, I'm sure the entire neighborhood heard. I was wondering what was going on but quickly disregarded it. As I got to the first bus nearby my house, I got off at the intersection where I'm supposed to take a second bus. That leads me straight to the terminal across the mall. While I was waiting at the shelter, I see a guy, around my age, in his 20s, staring right at me, with eyes so black and empty. Mind you, there was no one else around besides the two of us. I remember thinking to myself that it seemed odd he was wearing a sweater with a heavy-looking backpack and construction boots, both of which looked oversized for his tall, slim figure. When it was blazing hot outside, not even for a split second, did he once tear his gaze away from me. Then, it quickly hit me that I recognized him as a regular customer that frequently comes in to buy earphones at the store I worked at. Now, I usually try to keep to myself, but for some reason, I've been told I draw all kinds of people to me with my friendly, positive aura. I felt the need to pretend that I was on my phone to avoid any sort of conversation. He then proceeded to take a seat beside me, still gazing at me, and mustered a hi, before going on that he recognized me from work, and if I was going there right now, etc. When the bus finally arrived, we both got on, and he took a seat next to me. We had small talk about random stuff and our hobbies. He went on to tell me about his broken relationship with his parents, where he ended up getting kicked out. I assumed he was homeless at first, but he kind of confirmed it subtly, and he told me that he's been couch surfing between friends' houses. We finally reached the bus terminal that's across the mall. He ended up walking me to my work. I didn't ask him to, before going off his own way. Before departing, he asked for my number, which I stupidly gave to him and told me, if you ever want to just chill or smoke with me, to text me. After conversing with him, I shrugged off any preconceived judgment I had of him earlier of being creepy. For just a guy that's socially awkward and perma-fried. He ended up texting me later on that night asking to hang out, but I cut the conversation short, telling him I was tired and also had work the next day. I never heard from him again. Now, here's where things get interesting. After a few days and then weeks, news reports were coming out that there was a violent sexual assault that occurred right where the trails were across my house, near the town hall. The victim was a teenage girl who was going for a walk when she was struck with an unknown object by the subject. He happened to be armed with a gun and proceeded to sexually assault her before leaving the scene. It took about a week for the police to find the subject. The investigation was ongoing. It shook up the entire community. Nothing like this has happened before. It's fairly peaceful and close-knit. It's scary because it happened right in broad daylight, so when police released images of the suspect, with his name, following his arrest, I damn near had a heart attack. It was him, the same guy who I met at the bus stop, who walked me to my work, who asked for my number, who was texting me throughout the day after committing the crime. He had the same dark, black, empty eyes, long hair, and wearing the exact sweater, backpack, and shoes. I started looking at past news reports to compare the dates and times to when he texted me, and they all matched. Needless to say, my intuition about people are on and off, and that I should learn to trust it more. I felt a bit of guilt hoping I could have done something earlier, but there was no way for me to know until after. I started waiting tables when I was 18 to supplement my hourly income at a popular fast food chain, and soon enough I became well acquainted with an old man named Tim. He's probably in his early to mid 60s and very obese. He would regularly come into the little diner that I worked at, and was a regular prior to my employment there. The other younger females who worked in the restaurant didn't like to wait on him because he was kinda weird, and had a creepy, overly excited / animated type of vibe. But I didn't mind because it was a guaranteed $5 to $10 every day. I was good at talking to people, good at putting up with bullshit, and used the adjective unfuckwithable to describe myself. So I happily entertained him in a family-friendly environment. The first thing he would do was make cartoons on the computer and excitedly give them to me or the other servers. The other servers were uncomfortable with it, even though at this point it was very innocent. It was generic clip art, and maybe had everyone's names written by each character. Still, some servers were uncomfortable enough that management had asked him to stop bringing them in. He asked if I liked them, almost in an unexplainable childlike way, seeking approval. So I told him they were cute and fun because they were harmless enough, and I could tell that making them and gifting them made him happy. I figured it was his pastime during the later part of his life. He was unmarried, had no kids, and his daily hobby was visiting different women at different restaurants. Some of them older, some of them younger like I was. He would regularly talk about the lives of the other waitresses he would visit, and though I hadn't met any of them, I genuinely felt like I knew them. I just figured the guy was lonely, and there's nothing wrong with that. He would call me Sunshine, and try to offer advice where it wasn't warranted or solicited. I wasn't afraid to, respectfully, yet aggressively, put him in his place. I remember one specific occasion that he tried to criticize my relationship with my boyfriend, and it was like what you'd think a super conservative grandparent might think, expressed to me if he was my father, and providing me life-changing insight to put me on the right path. Though I wasn't on a wrong path. I was a full-time student, full-time employee, fully supported myself, and had a good attitude and outlook on life. Hence the adjective unfuckwithable. Anyway, I put him in his place so hard and so fast that he turned sheepish and childlike, like he transitioned from trying to be a father to acting like a child who needed my approval. The next time he visited, he had a hand-carved woodworking that he had made with my boyfriend's initials on them as an apology. He would buy me packs of gum and mints and tape printed photos of himself with a scolding look and the caption, "No smoking, sunshine," to try to detour me from cigarettes. I've since quit, without his help. Everyone else thought it was creepy, but whatever, right? Through the first year of me being his waitress, his gifts and actions got progressively more expressive. He started writing poems and short stories that had bad grammar, and were so elementary, they were almost painful. But he told me he just started to try it out, so I encouraged him, thinking he's lonely and needs a pastime. I had no problem with him writing little Hallmark card-style poems and giving them to me. The slightly off-putting aspect of this was that all of the poems and stories had a general theme of love and family. Also, I think it was around this time that he started looking at my Facebook page regularly. We weren't friends, and I told him I was never going to accept a friend request, so don't ever send one. Harsh, but boundaries, right? He would occasionally Photoshop pictures of me from my Facebook page, and maybe put my face on a cartoon body or something like that. He also kind of started to obsess over the fact that I was a twin, and he became very interested in me and all of my sisters. He would write stories about the twins, or the sisters, or make comic book style artwork about the twin superheroes. He even found a photo of my twin on Facebook somewhere, and started using her face photoshopped on things too. When I did some traveling, I took some artsy style pictures with a view of the background, and he took the liberty to Photoshop other tourists out of the background, light in the sky, and print lamented pictures with fancy borders for me to have. Thinking about it now, he probably kept these photos for himself too. After a year at my first serving job, I left for another serving job where I would be working weird third shift hours. I kind of thought that would be the end of Tim, but boy was I wrong. He went out of his way to come at the weird hours, and at the new place at least twice a week. I still maintained my fast food job, and he even started to visit me there, at a place that people rarely come in and sit down to eat. Never once did I tell him my schedule. He would just drive by and see my car. The stories he would write became progressively sexual and longer. I guess he finally felt comfortable to share these things with me, and he would always preface me for anything that was more erotic. It was like he wanted a friend, he wanted to be my father, and he wanted me to be his mother, all in his weird, childish, overly animated type of way. A few times he made me the subject of his stories, though he never went super explicit with those. One that sticks out to me was a super sexy, badass cowgirl sheriff, and all the men of the saloon wanted me. He would include weird freaking details like how someone had an STD. If I remember correctly, he made my sister the character that got an STD, and I had a huge issue with it. And I particularly had a huge issue with the fact that he started the story with, "This is the true story of." He rewrote the story without changing anything except for, "This is not a true story," and "Who did not get an STD?" I don't know. It was wild. There's also a weird photo that he took of my sister and I when she worked at the same place as I did. The whole time I knew him, he took a total of 2 pictures of me with his digital camera, and this was one of them. He had us pose with our hands out like we had a serving platter sitting on our hands. He then photoshopped a plate with his head on it, and photoshopped knives in our hands. He thought it was the funniest thing ever, and printed and laminated one for each of us to keep. At this point, I've known this man and been well acquainted with him for nearly 3 years. I genuinely felt sorry for the guy, and felt like I was able to offer him a friend when he really needed one. Aside from visiting waitresses, his hobbies included visiting an occasional burlesque show and attending the local courts just for fun. I was very aware that something was off about him, but I was okay with it because, though it was too hard to pinpoint exactly, I understood and also knew he would never, or could never, his size and fitness, hurt me. Admittedly, this was a fault of mine as a server. I offered more than food. I accidentally became a psychiatrist. There was a mid-20-year-old with autism I became good buddies with, despite him offering me money every once in a while for a blowjob. There was a 40-year-old man who thought he was going to marry a stripper half his age after he gave her all of his savings and sold his Mustang to give her more money. And there was the paranoid 50-year-old schizophrenic man who had clearly never been diagnosed or received any help, and I was honored to be the person he felt comfortable practicing his social skills with. I don't know. I digress. I guess I just want to be transparent that I was aware of all the red flags, but I was okay with it. But then things started to really cross a line, though they were probably already past when I got engaged. He would ask me stuff like if I'd let him hold my baby when I have kids, and he started to write stories and make cards and cartoons from my fiance's perspective. He would say, "I bet this is how Luke feels about you." He would also do it from a mother's perspective, saying stuff like, "It must be a mother's dream." I mean, at this point he was seriously making me so much stuff, be it cartoons, pictures, or stories, that he would bring it all to me in a manila folder, and it would be along the lines of fatherly, motherly, childish, silly, sexual, romance, and etc. I decided to keep the folders in my filing cabinet, just in case there was ever some type of case against him that needed evidence. My fiance and I had an open dialogue about Tim, and at this point, we decided that it was best to cut him off. I was looking for a new job to get off of the wacky hours I was working, and the timing just seemed right. Tim was also regularly sending me applications to all restaurants he wouldn't mind going to. So yeah, there needed to be a break. My fiance wanted to talk to him, so I didn't seem like the bad guy, and all contact was cut. He respected it, to an extent. After cutting him off, Tim still had a weird contact with me through my older sister. She was a server at another restaurant that he frequented, though she avoided him and asked to never serve him given his interactions with me. However, she was also engaged and her wedding date was approaching. He also wrote her letters and made her cards with words that were way too heartfelt coming from a stranger regarding her marriage. Anyway, Tim decided to ask a few of the other servers if they were planning on going to the wedding. 2 of them were, and upon hearing this news, Tim described me in detail and asked the other servers to try to take some pictures of me for him. When I heard this, it was about 6 months after I had cut him off. I had a big fat eye roll over it, and thought whatever about it because the servers weren't going to do it, and he was still respecting our request to not contact me any longer. It's also relevant to note he's been blocked from my Facebook, which I haven't been actively using in 2 years or more anyway, but prior to the cutoff, even shortly after the cutoff, he still sent me multiple messages on Facebook every day, from as simple as "Good morning sunshine" to intricate and extensive stories. So, a timeline reminder before the punchline. I first waited on him around May 2015. He followed me to my next job and my long-term fast food job around the middle of 2016 and continued to follow me. I cut him off around February or March of 2018. When I was cleaning up my filing cabinet in December of 2019, I stupidly decided that I can throw all the weird, creepy, unsolicited artwork away. It had been nearly 2 years with no issues, no attempt to contact, and the stuff was just cluttering my space. Last week, I was sitting in my living room. A recognizable vehicle is parked outside of my driveway on the wrong side of the road. The man has his car window down, and I see a flash. I quickly grab my glasses to try to discern what the fuck is going on. I see his childish, overly animated smile, and I recognize his hair and facial hair, and realize the shirt he is wearing is the exact type of shirt Tim wears. I realize I recognize the vehicle because it's the same vehicle that would pull up to my place of employment 3 to 5 times a week for almost 3 years. Flash. I realize it's fucking Tim outside of my motherfucking residence, over 2 years later, taking pictures of my car and home with that goddamn digital camera that he took my picture with twice before in the past. I've been reading a lot of posts from here, and I'm remembering some weird stuff that happened to me and my family. I've already posted one story here, and it helped me to deal and realize that things are not as safe as I think. Sorry about my English, by the way. I'm Brazilian. This happened last year when I, a female, 24 years old, was visiting my mom. My neighborhood is known for being safe, or at least, that's what my family thought. We've got problems with neighbors on both sides of our house. We live in a small town that has been growing due to the university that was built in here. My mom lives across the street from the uni, cause she teaches there. Our house has 2 floors and my room is on the 2nd floor. The window is right on the front of our house, so you can see the street from it. Every night around midnight, when I was going to sleep, I heard my dogs barking and growling. Whenever I went to the window to see why they are barking, I couldn't see a thing. There are a lot of trees and bushes in front of my house, so maybe what was making them bark was hiding there. This went for at least a week, and it was always at midnight. This night, I was having trouble sleeping, so I was video chatting with my boyfriend. At midnight, my dogs were barking like crazy. I was sitting right in front of my window and couldn't see anything unusual, but I felt a weird vibe, like I was about to discover what was hiding on my front yard and scaring my dogs. I turned off the lights and stayed still, watching the streets in a placement that who was outside couldn't see me. My boyfriend was still chatting with me, saying that maybe it was a fox or a raccoon, because there's a lot of wildlife around where my mom lives, but I knew it wasn't an animal. I stayed there for a long time. My boyfriend went to sleep, and I kept looking at the window. It was about 1:30 when I saw something moving from the bushes. It was a man wearing all black, crouched right behind the bushes. My body froze, and I didn't call my mom to see it. I've already told her about my dogs going crazy in our front yard at the same time every night, but like my boyfriend, she said maybe it was an animal. So I was there looking at him, and he couldn't see me. He started moving but still was bent over so no one could see him. But as I was on the 2nd floor, I could see him just fine. He crawled with his back right next to our fence until he reached the neighbor's gate. Right inside that gate was a car parked. What happened next was really fast. He lit up a Molotov cocktail and tossed it in the car. That car went up in flames like crazy, and I finally called my mom to see what was happening. He ran away like a feral cat, so fast down the street. My mom was calling the police, and then the firemen. But as they got here, the man was long gone. The next day, my mom got a call from the police officer that came the night before, telling her that they arrested the man that did it. He was trying to convince his ex-wife, who was our neighbor, to get back with him. He said he would make things worse if she didn't get back with him. After that, she moved out in a week. We never really talked to her, so I don't know any more details. I'm happy he got arrested. I'm sad I only managed to do something after he set her car on fire. I apologize for the length, and obligatory, I'm writing this on my phone. This is a memory that keeps popping up in my head. I still shiver at the thought of it, even though most people tell me I'm being paranoid. I think they're saying that to make me feel better, but so far, it hasn't worked. In 2015, I was living with my then boyfriend. I was 18 at the time. We were living in a very sketchy apartment building in a very sketchy neighborhood. When I say sketchy, I mean crack house type of sketchy. You'd find anything from alcoholics, severely mentally ill people to drug dealers and heroin addicts living in these apartments. And the police were called to the property once or twice every 2 weeks. We even drove by sometimes to check for safety reasons. There was an incident once during the night. One of the neighbors knocked on the door, and my boyfriend went to open up while I was asleep. One of the neighbors, a drug addict who happened to be severely schizophrenic, was at the door, and he barged into the apartment and threatened my boyfriend with a knife. Luckily, my boyfriend managed to calm him down and got him out of the apartment. For reasons like this, we bought a live security camera that we installed on our door that also connected to our TV, so that we could easily check who was at the door. Everything was fine for a couple of weeks, until this one night. My boyfriend's best friend was sleeping over this weekend, and I thank God for that. We were all sleeping. I guess it was around 3 or 4 a.m. at the time, when I woke up to someone ringing the doorbell. The camera was connected to the TV, but there was also a small screen attached to the door that I could activate to see who was outside. Since everyone was sleeping in the living room, I walked into the hallway to check the small screen instead of turning the TV on. When I pressed the button, I saw 2 guys wearing hoodies looking at the camera. I paused for a second because I didn't fully understand what was going on. Not until they looked at each other, nodded, then one of the guys reached his hand towards the camera and ripped it out, making the screen go black. I stood there for about 5 seconds before I realized what happened. I ran back to the living room and shook my boyfriend awake, almost yelling, well, also whispering, "Quick, get up, someone just stole your camera." He darted up and ran outside. Didn't even bother to put on a shirt or shoes. All the noise woke his buddy up, naturally. According to him later on, he saw a guy running away into a wooded area, so he chased after him. What he didn't know at the time was that I saw 2 guys and not just one. Well, I think the guy who ran away was just the distraction, because about a minute after he ran out, I heard someone entering the hallway. I froze in absolute terror. Buddy noticed that and sprinted to the door separating the hallway and living room. The conversation went something along the lines of, "Intruder. Oh, is boyfriend's name here? Buddy. No, he's not. Oh, could I maybe just come inside and sit down for a minute? I don't think that would be appropriate since he isn't here for the moment. Oh, but I could just come inside and wait for him until he gets back. That's a no. You're gonna have to leave. Please, just for a minute. No, please leave." He left. Buddy came in with a shocked but also frightened expression on his face. Both of us were in awe about what just happened. My boyfriend came back about 5 minutes later and told us about the unsuccessful chase. Both me and Buddy were terrified as he started telling us what happened while he was outside. Boyfriend said he only saw one guy outside. When I had the time to process the situation, my theories were: A, they stole the camera as a distraction so my boyfriend would chase him, while guy 2 raided the apartment while he was out. B, they knew I was there, but not that Buddy was. They stole the camera to lure him out, so the other one could walk in and either rob the place, assault me, or both. Both of these options are likely. The first one more than the other. The reason I also suspect the second theory is because most of the neighbors knew that I lived there with him. Many of them had seen me leaving and entering the apartment, and many of them occasionally said hi to me in passing, so most of the neighbors knew about me as well. I'm also incredibly small, 5 foot tall even, so I'd be an awfully easy target. Luckily, I'll never know what would have happened that night. I don't know what could have happened if he wasn't there that night, but I know for a fact that something would have happened to me. If I wasn't a target to begin with, I definitely would have become one if the guy walked in and saw me alone. I think whatever guardian angel that placed Buddy there that specific night. Every time I have told this story to friends, they've told me I am being paranoid and that I probably wouldn't have gotten hurt. But I don't believe that. Nobody planned such a break-in without malicious intent to begin with, so I don't doubt for a second that I wouldn't have been caught in the middle of it if I were alone. So to whoever those hooded guys were that stole our camera and entered the apartment, I hope we never meet again. Back in late 2016, I, female then 23, was moving from NYC to Boston. 2 college friends, also female, agreed to live with me and we started looking for an apartment. We were fond of one place in particular, out in the suburbs next to a forest park. I got to talking with the landlord, an older man probably in his 70s, and mentioned that I repair antique dolls. He excitedly said he had a doll his mother's uncle had brought her back from Germany in World War I, and the elastic holding the arms on had worn out. I said I could definitely fix it, and we exchanged contact info. He was firm that my work would have to take place at his house since he was nervous about moving a fragile antique, but at the time, I didn't think anything of it. Now that I'm older and wiser, I know doll doctor house calls are not the norm. Ultimately, we went with another place closer to the city proper, but I didn't want to lose a prospective doll repair client. I called him a week or so after we got settled, and once again, he seemed delighted to get his family heirloom fixed. Nothing seemed odd until I asked for his address to work out how to get there.
Don't worry about it,
he said.
I'll pick you up. What's your new address?
My eagerness cooled a little. I tried to put him off by saying that I didn't want to bring him out of his way, and I could get myself there no problem, but he kept insisting. Never even told me what town he lived in, just repeated over and over that it was fine, he'd pick me up, it would be no trouble at all. Eager for the business, and a bit embarrassed about my paranoia, I caved. I told him my address and we arranged a date and time for him to pick me up. Over the next few days, literally everyone in my life told me to call and cancel. My housemates asked if I'd lost my mind. My mom and sister both told me I was driving them mad with worry. To be honest, I think I was looking for an excuse to call the whole thing off. It just didn't feel right. I called the evening before the appointed day and left a message saying that something had come up. I added that if he was free the following Monday, my housemate could drive me over so he wouldn't be inconvenienced. Which was true. She'd offered in a last-ditch effort to make me see sense. The next day, the time we'd picked rolled around. I was sitting in the living room, working on a sewing project when a car pulled up in front of the house. I looked down, and my heart jumped when I recognized the old man sitting in the driver's seat. He didn't look up, didn't appear to see me, just sat there for what felt like a century until, finally, he started the car and drove off. I never saw him again. He never contacted me about getting his mother's precious doll repaired. And maybe I was overreacting to an innocent old guy with poor social skills who forgot to call back. But I had a bad feeling about the situation, and ultimately, think I did the right thing. The part that creeps me out the most is I almost had this man for my landlord. It could have been fine, or it could have been much, much worse. Okay, I'm going to try to explain this clearly without it being a novel. In my early 20s, I waitressed and bartended at a hotel restaurant. Construction workers in town for work often stayed at the hotel and would come eat and drink at the restaurant. I met a really tall, cute guy. Not the creep, but ultimately a prick. And whenever he was in town, he would hang out and whatever. He lived 2 states over, but was in my area a lot. So one time he was working a job and staying in a town the state over, and I drove to meet him. When I got to his hotel, and we went to the hotel bar and had a few drinks with some other construction guys that happened to be there. Not his company. Then went back to the room. Later we decided to order food from the bar. The prick was in the shower when the bar called, so I went and picked up our food. When I got down there, the guys we were drinking with earlier were still there, and pretty sauced by this time. The bartender was busy for a while, so I sat and played the digital slots. One of the construction guys, the creep, came over and immediately started hitting on me and trying to touch me and put his arm around me and crap, despite knowing full well I was there with someone else. He kept telling me his room number over and over. I had to directly, loudly, tell him to get away from me, and he finally did once others started noticing. In my flustered rage, I grabbed my food from the bartender and went back to the room and told the prick all about it. He rolled his eyes but kind of shrugged it off. I was really put off by it and felt really vulnerable. That's when I realized my phone was gone. Fuck. I left it at the bar on the slot machine. Prick and I went to the bar to look for it. The guys were gone, but the bartender told me the creep took my phone and assured me he was going to return it to me. Great. Then I remembered that he had told me his room number. I told the prick this, and he of course passively accused me of asking for it. I didn't care, and marched him to Creep's room. I knocked, and the prick, 6'7" by the way, stayed to the side out of view of the peephole to see what would happen. The creep, way too enthusiastically, swung the door open and grabbed my wrist and proceeded to try to pull me into the room. Thank God for the prick, who then stepped behind me and yelled, "Hey," to the creep, who was half his size. I'll never forget the look on the creep's face, like he just shat a full brick. I yanked my arm away and yelled, "Give me my phone." The creep lied and said he didn't have it, and the bartender was lying and blah blah. The prick didn't do anything else at this point, so we just left. I felt defeated and unsafe and annoyed and just wanted to leave, but I couldn't because I didn't have my phone. I managed to sleep a little that night, but woke up at like 4:30 a.m. when the prick left to go to work. I stayed in the hotel room till about 7 a.m. just fuming. Then I decided to do something about it. I gathered my stuff and went and found a maintenance man who was working in the pool area. I contemplated telling him the whole story, but decided to just damsel in distress it to avoid more drama. I told him I was leaving and realized I had locked my phone in my room and gave him the creep's room number. We went to his room and I had the maintenance man call my cell phone from his. Sure enough, you could hear a faint vibrating through the door. He took this as proof of it being my room and opened the door and let me in. I thanked him and he left. I grabbed my phone and turned to leave, but decided my petty ass wasn't done yet. I took the creep's toothbrush and ran it all along the toilet rim and put it back in the same spot. Then I happily left, phone in hand, and stopped seeing the prick for good. I still smile knowing that the creep had to notice that my phone was gone, but probably had no idea how I got it back, or that he was brushing his teeth with toilet water. Precursor. I've aged since then. I do not fall for these tricks as easily as I did then. I still hope for the good in people, but I usually doubt it's there for a while. I went to beauty school just after high school, so I was just learning what it was like to be an adult. Work, go to school, and socialize all at the same time. If you've ever gone to beauty school, you know the hours are pretty lengthy, and it's a lot of work in a short amount of time. You also know that you're mostly crammed with a lot of women of different ages, and a few boys. If there's a straight man in school, and he's even mildly attractive, obviously considering you're attracted to that type of person, most women in school are just so at awe because it's the only male person we are seeing during most of our weeks. That takes me to Dave, a few years older than me, tall, drives a Ducati to school, mysterious and handsome. Every girl was always putting on a little extra makeup, turning their hips toward him, flirting when he was around. He was cute, quiet, and always knew what to say. I wasn't as interested in catching his eye till he randomly asked me to meet up with him for a bite one day after school. I was single, needing to experience dating for the first time, and he didn't seem that bad to hang out with. Things started off very sweet and genuine. He'd send goodnight texts, joke with me at school, and even genuinely seemed like he wanted to hang out more and more. We'd go to bars and he knew everyone, so I could just get right in. I was underage at the time. We'd go eat, see shows, two-step, drink. I felt like I was starting to feel like an adult, enjoying the life, and being wooed by a handsome, slightly older man. We'd drive around on his bike, he'd take me to nice, quiet dinners, always offer to pay, and even did little things like hold his arm out when I walked downstairs or off a curb. I had never experienced this type of gentleman before, but as quickly as the sweet dates came, so did a very weird, calculated, and controlling behavior. He would start to ask why I didn't smile with my teeth. Was it because I was embarrassed of myself? He would sit behind me working at school and taunt me about how slow I was. He'd say things like, "Don't sit like that," or "Say things that way. That's not what ladies do. And I'm a lady, right? Don't wear that lipstick. It's trashy." But I guessed maybe I was being inappropriate. Maybe he's right. I should act more like an adult than a child. Be better at school. Look more like an adult. He brought me to his house one night, a place he rented a room from. Suddenly the stoic, Edward Cullen type turned into a person I didn't recognize, outside of the random mood shift. His room was filled with clothing and garbage, like old Gatorade bottles filling the floors. There was a TV and a bed. Of all the things I could really make out in the room, he brushed dirt off his bed for me to sit down. We hung out for a while and he oddly confessed he never brushes his teeth. Okay. Well, looking at this room, I could believe that. He also mentioned that he just bought new clothes when he needed them and never washed the dirty ones. Just left them there. This was all in the first 2 to 3 weeks. Kinda red flags if you ask me. The lights were off at one point and we're just watching a show, and I see a light like a cell phone right outside the window behind the TV. I jump and get his attention, but he had to have seen. He brushes it off, saying it must just be a roommate, though I notice he's texting someone at the same time. I let it go for the night, eventually go home, but still feel uncomfortable. Then the phone calls start happening and the stories of his ex. They lived together. She was 10 years older than him and had a 6-year-old kid. She was crazy. If he and I would hang out, I'd suddenly start getting calls from the unknown number the minute I walked in my door. They would ring till my voicemail got them, and no one would say a word till the message ran out of time. It'd happen every 10 minutes for 3 or so hours. I asked him about this, if it was him, and he said it may just be his crazy ex. But how would she have my number? He'd say, well, I had to give her some of her things and she stole my phone at one point, must have taken your number. Still, the gentlemanly dates would happen, and the gifts. The gifts. Sending roses and coffee to my work, showing up with massage and spa packages every week. We still saw each other at beauty school almost daily, and he'd be kind, but it was always hush-hush until it was outside of school. I was torn. Is this person lying, or is this the first kind person to want to date me? Maybe he just has some flaws, and a crazy ex. Then the texts and Facebook messages started coming, clarifying it was her. He told me about your fucked up life and secrets you've told him. I know he just saw you. I know you were just at his house. I was outside his window looking in. Your red dress was nice. He laughs about you. Poor you. Just a whore, little girl. And shit like that over and over. I'd block her, and she'd have friends send me the same BS. She freaked me out, and he always denied it and apologized for her behavior. Then there were days he wouldn't show up for school, and he would text me during the day saying they were together, sending pictures of him. I tried to confront him, but he always denied having anything to do with her, and repeating that she wanted to ruin his life. Then she started going to my work, telling my coworkers she was my friend, and would color things on kids' menus like my name plus his name, heart, and then tell them she wanted me to have it. She'd send me a random picture of him in a booth at my work, and I'd put the pieces together when I got there and got her notes, asking the coworkers where she was sitting and what she looked like. It was gross and embarrassing, let alone scary. My car was broken into at school, and nothing was taken from it but a bill that had my address on it. I was then so scared. I'd come home at any point in time, and she'd start calling over and over as soon as I closed the door behind me. I felt trapped. She would call my work and school saying she was my mom and try to get more info on me, or call them as a customer, trying to get me fired. My roommates finally kicked me out because they were rightfully freaked out, so I turned to the police. They put me in contact with a detective who I handed all of the calls, texts, and messages plus notes she left me at work. I never answered the phone or responded to a single message from her. I had hundreds of calls, texts, for at least a month. They came in every day from the same number. I never blocked that number after the first few were blocked, so I could keep a log on all of the attempts. Plus, I kept a journal of every incident leading up to me coming to the police, just in case. I watched a lot of crime documentaries. He told me there was nothing he could do to trace the number back to a specific person, and since she hadn't threatened my physical safety, his hands were tied. The very next day he calls me and is furious, telling me he can't help me if I'm harassing her back. I was confused, and when I asked what the hell he meant, he said, "You're calling a mother non-stop throughout the night, terrifying her and her kid." Because I was the 20-year-old and she was 36. Of course he's going to believe the adult, but I never called her. He asked me to come to his office to show me his evidence he has against me. She's forwarded him tons of texts saying things like, "You're a little whore who I hope loses their kid." And I just broke down. I would never say something like that to someone, and I know I didn't send these tens of texts, especially overnight, when I had school the next day. He didn't believe me and dismissed me. He ultimately turned against me and was now on her side. This was crushing. I broke things off for good with Dave. Basically told him to fuck the fuck off. We still had to go to school together, and he was a complete dick. I embarrassed myself in front of my friends defending him so long. My work, my school, who I had to beg to make sure this girl didn't come around again, and a detective who ultimately didn't believe a word I said, just to get some peace. My friends were tired of seeing me scared, stressed, and constantly talking about this weird situation happening to me. I was over it all. She finally left me alone once I moved, got a new car, new phone, deleted social media, but it still freaks me out that we all live in the same town. She messaged me a few years ago from a different account when I was back on social media and said she was sorry, that she was manipulated by Dave, and that they did this to many girls. This was disturbing and gut-wrenching to me. Did a mother of a 6-year-old really have nothing better to do than play fucked up games with a sociopath? Maybe two sociopaths together, I guess. I work at a convenience store. I've had some creepy customers come in before, but this one was a little more disturbing. If it weren't for what had been said and done, I don't think this would have been that bad. I normally work third shift, which is 4 p.m. to around 12 a.m., and I'm by myself for the last 4 hours of my shift. This man had come in earlier that day and was acting odd, jittery, chewing at his lip constantly, fumbling with his debit card, to the point I did everything for him except putting the pin in. Fast forward to around 10:30 p.m. I'm sweeping the floors as I'm supposed to do every night when the man entered. He approached my register, and I asked him what he needed. "Hey, can I have one of those lighters?" I pick one up and go to scan it, but he tells me that he doesn't have any money. I tell him he can't have it, and he glares at me before leaving. A man was in line behind him, and the entire time I was scanning his things, the lighter guy was staring at me through the window right next to my register. He eventually walks off, and the man jokes about the creepy guy asking for a lighter when he, the man in line, didn't even have his with him. He tells me to be safe, then walks out to the gas pumps. I start sweeping again, but then I turn around to move a small crate out of my way. The creepy guy is staring at me again, just watching me work. I quickly make my way to the back room to make my mop water so I could get away from him for a second. He stayed there for a solid 5 minutes before stalking off again. I grabbed a random receipt, as a cover, and basically bolted to the man at the gas pumps. I got close, and asked if he was in a hurry to go anywhere. I told him that the creepy lighter guy was still hanging around, and that it was really freaking me out. He promised me that he didn't plan on actually leaving after getting gas. At this point, I thought it wouldn't take up too much of his time, since we both thought the man was already wandering away from the store. Unfortunately, He went back toward the store a few seconds later. Soon, an older woman comes in and I warn her about the creepy guy. She asks what I was talking about, and I subtly nod in his direction. Mind you, still hanging around my window. She looks a little disturbed, leaning in and whispering, "What does he want?" I explained that he wanted a lighter, but didn't have money, so I didn't give him one. I told her to be careful, and she quickly told me to worry more about myself, since I was at the store alone. She left, and I saw the creepy guy approach the window again. Thankfully, he didn't look in, just hung around it like he was waiting for someone. After a while, a daughter of a family friend comes in with her girlfriend, and we quietly make small talk, like the last woman. I warned them that later guy was still roaming around and he could be dangerous. Before they get to tell me anything, a woman who was talking with the guy from the gas pumps spotted them while scanning family friend's items, hurried in and told me to call the cops. Obviously not familiar with the area I worked in, and hearing 3 different people telling me what numbers to call, I was shaking and near tears. Family friend said she would call while I calmed down. Another girl had run out at this point, and I don't blame her. Family friend's girlfriend told me that later guy had threatened to throw rocks through the window and hurt and rob me. After about 3 minutes of pacing and trying not to cry, I saw my mom's truck pull in. I bolted to her, telling her what was going on. She calmed me down and walked me back to the entrance. As this happened, creepy guy had climbed the hill and crossed the street to Bojangles and sat near the front door. Cops arrived. The man from the pumps gave a statement. I gave mine. And finally, family friend gave hers, which included the threats. From what was said, he was about to break into my car. The man that stayed with me stopped him, and that didn't stop the creep from roaming still. After we talked to the cops, they sped to Bojangles and confronted the lighter guy. After arguing, a quick pat down, and more arguing, the man was put in the back of the cop car. When I was 19 or 20, I used to work for a well-known gas station chain, a lot of the time on evening shift, 4 to 12. I was alone. Though both cash registers were behind a wall of plexiglass, there was still a 2 to 3 foot opening between them where a sliding door is for the night shift to close to avoid robberies. It was about 5 p.m. and still daylight when this guy came in. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up when he walked in. There was just something about him that wasn't right. I should also add, I'm a female, if my username didn't already give it away. He walked to the back of the store, made it seem like he was looking for something in my coolers, and by the back shelves. He never once picked anything up to read or look over, and every now and then he'd look up at me. He'd gradually make his way toward me, and would retreat to the back of the store when someone came in. This went on for about 10 minutes. These 2 women came in and went to my coolers at the back of the store. I quickly wrote a note on a piece of paper that said, "Please stay with me so I can call the cops." When one of the ladies came to pay, I showed her the note. She nodded and went and told her friend. I had my eye on the creepy guy while trying to keep from completely panicking. One of the ladies leaves the store. The other lingers around the store. She looks outside and sees something, then leaves. Immediately after she left, and I was about to hit call, the creepy guy rushes up to the counter. He looks up to the glass door as he's 2 feet from me, then bolts. I look outside, and the 2 ladies are talking to the cop that had just pulled up, as the creep was running up to my counter to get gas. The creepy guy must have seen the cop and decided it wasn't worth it. The cop looks over the guy as he takes off, then comes inside to talk to me. I explained to him his behavior, and how my finger was on the call button as soon as he pulled up to get gas. The 2 ladies came back in to make sure I was alright, then left. The cop leaves, then comes back about 30 minutes later, saying they picked the guy up. He explained the guy was high on meth, and was looking for someone to rob to fuel his habit more. He was also in possession of a hunting knife, and the cop figured he would have seriously harmed me to get what he wanted. To this day, I thank my lucky stars the cop pulled up when he did. So this by far is the craziest and scariest first date I have ever had in my life. The date itself lasted about 2 hours, so keep that in mind when you are reading about the tornado of events that unfolded. So to start from the beginning, I, 30 female, met this guy on Bumble, 39 male, of course. Well, I was renting a room at a sober house in Colorado Springs to get everything squared away to officially move out here. Nursing license transferred, job, apartment. After I officially moved out and got settled in, we talked on the phone a few times and decided to meet in person. It was about 4 in the afternoon, and we planned to have dinner and maybe go on a scenic drive. He had asked me to pick him up from his work, and we could go from there. Didn't think much of it at the time, so I went to his work and picked him up, figuring I would drop him back off so he could take his car and go home. When I picked him up, the first thing he told me to do when we got in my car is stop at the liquor store. He wanted to grab something for later. After he told me to stop at the liquor store, I felt kind of awkward because he knew that I was in recovery. At this point in my recovery, I feel okay with being around alcohol. He came out of the liquor store with 2 shooters of Patron and a bottle of vodka. Not even minutes after leaving the liquor store, and me heading to the place where we were going to get food, he is slamming the shots of Patron in my car. I started noticing with his behavior that he was very manic, and kind of jumping from subject to subject, and then would randomly ask me if I was upset, if he had done something to make me mad. I have all bad vibes, and can tell something is very off with him. During our drive to get the food, he's telling me how when he was little, he threw a rock purposely at a bunny and killed it, and also within the last 5 years was at a bonfire with his friends, and shot a cat that was in a field. At this point, I'm totally weirded out, and already trying to figure out how I am going to end this date. This was brought up very casually, like it was no big deal. Also, he knows that I have 3 cats. We get to the taco place, and he proceeds to ask the staff if they have no-carb tacos. The lady looks confused and basically was like, tacos are pretty much all carbs. He started getting anxious about what to order. I could tell with his mannerisms. I ended up just ordering for us. He proceeded to then get a beer to go, along with a shot of Patron. Got it to go because of the whole pandemic situation. So we get into my car and now I have a bottle of vodka, 2 empty shot bottles of Patron, which he just tossed in the side of the door, as well as a to-go beer and another shot of Patron. He continues to drink and would randomly shout, "Look at us, we are in Colorado eating great tacos. I'm drinking, you're driving, it's beautiful out here." So at this point, I'm desperately wanting to end the date and said I had to go meet a friend. He seemed a little upset by this and also confused as to why I would have plans with anybody else on the day of our date. So we get back to the dealership he works at and said it was fine to just drop him off, but then quickly changed his mind, and he wanted me to bring him into the dealership while people were still working and eat the tacos. He said, "Let's go in. It's a beautiful place. I can drink comfortably. We can eat the tacos." I declined, and we ate them in the car quick. When the plan was for us to go separate ways, he then asks if I can bring him home. I said okay. Anything to get him out of my presence at this point. He also lives close by my apartment. Before we head to his place, he said he had to grab some stuff out of his car. So he gets back in my car, and I hear him put something in the side of the door. I look over and see the handle of a gun. My stomach immediately drops. I was like, "Is that a fucking gun?" He laughed and said, "Yeah, I can't just leave it in my car. I love guns." I told him I was super uncomfortable and he just laughed like, "How would you be uncomfortable?" Basically just said, "Because I don't know you at all, barely. This is our first time meeting, and now you have a gun in my car." Thinking back, I should have told him to get out of my car, but I had never been in this kind of situation before, and the fact that there was now a loaded gun in my car, and he was drunk, I did not know what to do, so just proceeded to leave the dealership and bring him home. So on the way to his apartment, he then asked me if he can see my phone. Thinking in my head like, okay, no way, you're drunk. You have a gun in my car, and you want my cell phone in your possession? I asked why, and he kind of stuttered and said he just wanted to look up a song. I said I would type it in, and he insisted that he type it in. I then just barely blurted out, "No, you have a gun in my car, and now you want my cell phone. Not happening." He keeps seeming so alarmed that I was so freaked out about having the gun in the car, and that he wanted my phone. After typing in the song he wanted, I continued to humor him and make future plans and talk about how great of a time I had. This was the only tactic I could think of to keep him in a positive mood and think that things were going great. All I could think of was the loaded gun next to him. So finally, after what felt like hours, we get to his apartment. As he is getting out of my car, he goes to grab his gun very haphazardly and literally has his finger on the trigger. At this point, he was still in the passenger seat of my car. He then steps out and could probably see the look of fear in my eyes and left, and then whipped the gun around in front of him and finally put it in his back pocket. Mind you, once again, he's been drinking this entire time and told me he had shot and killed a cat on purpose. He then told me to keep the bottle of vodka he had bought, so I had to come back later to watch a movie with him. I said absolutely not. Take the bottle, and I will call you after I meet my friend. I never reached out, and I haven't heard from him since. Thank God. So this happened my senior year of college, over a year ago. I lived in a college neighborhood, surrounded by other kids that went to my school, with the exception of a family or two. We knew our neighbors well, and everyone was fairly civil with one another. We did keep in mind, though, that this was a college area, and some sketchy things could happen. I think it was May, when the first break-in happened. I woke up one morning to some texts in my group message telling me that my next-door neighbor's house had been broken into. They had multiple things stolen. A backpack with a laptop and textbooks inside, a gaming console, etc. They had notified the police and they were on the case. This obviously set my roommates and I into a little bit of a panic, because we were a house of 4 girls, and none of us being wildly brave by any means. We decided the best we could do was make sure our door was locked at all times, whether we were home or not. So that's what we did. Flash forward to a couple of days later. My roommate, Maggie, and I were the only 2 home out of the 4 who lived in our house. We stayed up late watching movies as we always did, and then I headed off to my room to go to bed, while Maggie stayed on the couch. We were, I'm not pleased to admit, the worst at turning off the lights and saving electricity. So this night, the light in the kitchen, living room, and hallway were all on. Sorry, I know. We got better about turning lights off eventually. I slept soundly through the night, and woke up as the sun shone through the cracks in my blinds the next morning. As usual, after I woke up I spent about 10 minutes in bed on my phone before getting up to use the bathroom. On my way back into my bedroom, I noticed that my blinds were tapping slightly against the window frame, suggesting that there was a breeze. My fan was off, and my window was closed, so there should be no movement, right? Well, right, if my window had been closed. When I drew open my blinds, I was absolutely horrified to see that my bedroom window had been completely open all night, or at least since after I had gone to sleep. I knew that my window was shut when I went to sleep the night before, and there is something wildly unsettling about the fact that my bed is also pushed up on the wall right against my window. So perfectly, in fact, that I used to sit in my window, on my bed, with my feet completely able to touch the grass below. That's how low this window was, and that's how close my bed is. Now, at this point, I was frantic. I ran out into the living room to see if Maggie was okay, and if she had noticed anything or heard anything throughout the night. She wasn't home, and I assumed she had gone to class. I texted her immediately, explaining what had happened and asking all of my questions. She responded lightning fast. She had woken up this morning in the living room, and when she walked into her bedroom to get ready for class, her window was open. Her desk, which sits right in front of her window, was pushed away from the wall, and her closet doors, which were always open, because they jutted right up against the carpet so they were very hard to open and close, were closed. She said it looked exactly as though someone pushed her desk away from the window to give themselves more room to enter quietly. In an absolute frenzy, I texted my other roommates, who hadn't been home, in my group message alerting them of what had happened. I crawled the house looking to see if any of my things were missing, and when my roommates came home later that day, they did the same. Nothing had been stolen, not even my laptop or my phone, which were both charging on my bed, right in front of the window. Not even Maggie's Apple Watch that was sitting on her desk in front of her window. We did call the police, and they came to file a report, but they never followed up with us about it. I asked if they could dust my window for prints, as there had to have been handprints because the only way to open my window from the outside is to press your palms directly on the glass and push upward with significant force, but they never followed through with doing that either. I'm not sure really what to think of this, so maybe it was a planned break-in, but they didn't think I would be asleep in their point of entry, but they entered, we think, through another window nonetheless. So why didn't they take anything? And how did the sounds not wake us up? I was directly next to my window, so they would have had to completely jump over my body to enter my room. So I didn't think they did enter from there at least, which is a little relieving. Maybe they didn't enter at all, because the lights were all on and they realized people were home, but our cars were in the driveway, and it did seem as though they entered because Maggie's closet doors were shut. This was super bizarre to me. I'm just relieved that I've since moved out of that house. I'm pretty annoyed that the police didn't take it very serious, but at least I'm also a little relieved that the people who broke in and I never had to meet. I, 33 female, live at a funeral home owned and run by my dad. I live in the apartment upstairs and do some side work for my dad, but I don't work for the funeral home. Since I live here though, I tend to interact with a lot of people who are here for the funeral related things and whatnot. I represent my dad when I'm speaking to someone here, so I'm always nice and helpful. I had a couple crazy people I've dealt with, but nothing like this. This was in mid-March sometime because it was right at the beginning of the whole COVID takeover. I had gone to pick up some food for my family around 6 p.m. Unless there is a service, the employees are usually gone, and I believe it was a Saturday as well. So I pull into my parking lot, and as I park, a car drives by me, going towards the entrance side. It was a dark SUV, and there are so many people who work here who have similar cars that I couldn't see from that far who it was, but I gave a quick wave, thinking it was someone I knew. Bad idea. So the car stops and the guy gets out. Like I said, I'm used to having to help people and tell them where they can drop things or pick up stuff, etc. So this guy gets out and comes towards my car. I roll my window down a little, expecting to just say hello and tell him that no one is here working. He comes right over to my window and starts leaning in and peering into my car, which was a red flag already, as it was very invasive. I'm glad my doors were locked, and I only put it down a little. So this dude basically had his head in my car and it creeped me out. But before anything else, his eyes scared the crap out of me. He was very, very pale, with bright red hair, and his eyes were literally the craziest and scariest eyes I've ever seen. It was chilling. I don't know if he was on drugs or just crazy, but I'm already uncomfortable at this point. So he starts to talk to me and ask me if I work here, blah blah. I tell him no one is working, please call tomorrow in the morning and you can speak to someone. Thought that would be it. Not even close. This man came to bring an application to my father to work for the funeral home. He was apparently in IT or something, but had studied embalming and also volunteered for the Red Cross. He was talking a mile a minute and I was so incredibly uncomfortable, but even more so when he started to tell me about how certain embalming techniques he studied included hanging cadavers by their feet and other insane sick stuff. He had absolutely no experience in embalming though. He cornered me in my car for 15 minutes and just rambled. I told him several times, please just call tomorrow morning. I really can't help you. So now I'm sitting here in my car with this insane man outside my car, and I also had food on my seat. He was looking into my car so he saw it. You would think he would take the hint. At some point, I texted my husband and said, come outside now. Thank God he actually saw my text and came out. So he comes up to this guy and he was like, can I help you? So the guy starts cornering my husband also. This guy had absolutely no idea what personal space was, and my husband kept backing up and he would move in closer every time. I took an opportunity to grab the food and get out since he was outside. When I got out, he started telling my husband and I, this virus is going around and there are going to be bodies piling up. They are going to need extra help here when there are hundreds of bodies dead. It almost seemed like he was excited at the thought. He had a resume, and I told him multiple times to please bring it by again. I didn't even want to touch anything he had, but he forced it into my husband's hands. I went to the stairs and gave my husband a concerned look and motioned for him to come in. This guy made me so extremely nervous, and I didn't want my husband out there any longer, but this guy was almost impossible to walk away from. He did not understand that it was done, so eventually, we got away from this freak and got inside. I immediately called my dad to explain what happened and warn him of this guy. I told my dad I had never felt more uncomfortable in my life, and there was something seriously wrong with this dude. I wanted to warn him that he would probably be back the next day. Oh, and he did come back. A couple days later, mid-morning, I'm upstairs in my apartment and there are several employees in the office upstairs. I hear someone ring the doorbell. Once, twice, 3 times. He then proceeded to ring it non-stop for 15 minutes. They assumed it was him and didn't answer. I went out, and I was like, what the fuck is with the doorbell? They knew it was him apparently because he had called earlier and wanted to talk to my dad, and one of the employees told him we aren't hiring, but he insisted on talking to my dad, so he came by. Then, after the doorbell went off for several minutes, the phone started ringing off the hook. Next, he was going around to all the windows and pounding on them relentlessly. I had told him how crazy he was, but I was glad they could now see what I meant and that I wasn't overreacting. Eventually, my older brother went down with a mask on. Like I said, this was right in the beginning, and people weren't even wearing masks regularly, but this guy had no boundaries. He then cornered my brother the same way, and would not let him leave and end the conversation. We were all just thinking, what the fuck is wrong with this guy? My dad did not want to talk to him, but he wouldn't give up. Next day, he comes back again. Same thing, banging on the windows and ringing the bell, calling incessantly. Eventually, my dad's secretary answered the phone and put him in his place and told him if he called again, they would call the cops. The best part is every time he showed up in full top-to-bottom biker gear, spandex, helmet, knee pads. Even though he apparently lived a few streets over, this guy was absolutely nuts. I'm so thankful he hasn't come back since. For reference, I'm a 27-year-old female, and this story takes place 10 years ago when I was 17. I had just started university and was excited about having a fresh, new start. Since I'd always been a nerdy outcast in high school, I'd never had a boyfriend before. I'd never been on a date. So, I was naive and optimistic about boys. My introverted and awkward personality hadn't magically changed since entering university. So it's safe to say that I didn't meet any interesting guys at school. One late night, I was in my room working on an assignment on my laptop when I received a request on MSN Messenger. The email address was a boy's name with some numbers. The name was clearly ethnic, and likely someone of the same origin as me. Intrigued, I accepted. For the sake of the story, we'll call this boy Ken. We got to chatting and I asked him how he had gotten my email address. He dodged the question. I let it go, not thinking too much of it. This was from a time when it was normal to accept anyone and everyone as a friend on Facebook and other social media platforms. As Ken and I continued to talk, I learned that he lived in my city and apparently wasn't much older than me. As I'd guessed, our roots were in fact in the same country. Let's call it Motherland. I asked him why he didn't have a picture of himself on his display picture, and this prompted him to suggest that we turn on our webcams because he wanted to see me too. I declined, but he insisted. Somehow, he convinced me, and we both switched on our webcams. I was pleasantly surprised and somewhat relieved to see that Ken was a good-looking, young guy, chatting to me from the comfort of his bedroom, seemingly very normal. Our MSN chats carried on for a couple of weeks. They developed into texts, and we even had a few phone calls. After I had agreed to give him my phone number, I started to develop a crush on Ken. He'd asked me to go out with him a couple of times, but I was always pretty busy with school, and our schedules weren't lining up. Finally, we found one afternoon when we were both free, and decided to schedule a lunch date. Ken had a car and had offered to pick me up from my university after I was done for the day. I was a little too dressed up for my C+ programming class, but just right for the lunch date we had planned at a local vegetarian restaurant. Stupidly, I didn't tell any of my friends where I was going or with whom because I was embarrassed about going on my very first date, at almost age 18, with someone who had randomly added me on MSN. I waited outside my building when a black car with heavily tinted windows pulled up beside me. The passenger side window rolled down and, sure enough, there was Ken, sitting in the driver's seat. I was happy to see that he was as cute in person as he was on webcam. However, what I wasn't expecting was the intense smell of weed floating out of the car. Not relevant, but part of the first impression. Admittedly, I was a bit taken aback and was concerned that he might be driving high. He unlocked the doors and motioned for me to get in, so I did, without dispute. As I sat down in the passenger seat, and he immediately put his hand on my thigh, I nervously shifted my leg away. "So," I started, "do you know where the restaurant is? I can guide you if you want." He smirked at me, but didn't say anything and just kept driving. Okay, kinda weird. I thought maybe he was just nervous or awkward, both of which I could sympathize with, so I let it be. I was about to try my hand at a little small talk, which I'm no good at, when I noticed him heading towards the highway ramp. I started to worry because the restaurant was not far from my campus, and there was no reason for us to be getting on the highway. You don't need to take the highway. The restaurant is really close by. I can guide you." I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could hear my own nervousness. Ken finally spoke. For the first time since I had gotten into the car, I thought maybe we could just go to my place instead. We can play Need for Speed, and I can make lunch for you. I was 17, on my way to the house of a guy I'd just met for the first time, and I hadn't told anyone where I was going. My mind was racing. I knew that this would be an utterly stupid thing to do. Despite the clear red flags waving in my face, I decided that I didn't want to ruin our first date by rejecting his offer to make me lunch and play Need for Speed together, which I told him I liked playing. Don't judge me. So like an idiot, I reluctantly agreed to avoid being rude. We made it to his house. It was apparently his family's house, and was situated in a sort of shady neighborhood. We stepped inside and, of course, no one was home except us. It was sparsely furnished and looked unkempt, which struck me as odd for a family home. He informed me that his Xbox was in his bedroom. I hesitated in the doorway, but he sat at the foot of his bed in front of the TV and patted the empty space beside him for me to have a seat. There was literally nowhere else to sit in his room, so I cautiously sat down, keeping as much distance as I could between us. I started to relax as we played Need for Speed, and he made us PB&Js to munch on. I was about to laugh at myself for being overly paranoid when Ken did something bizarre. He got up onto the bed and sat down directly behind me, his legs on either side of me, an extremely awkward position, and tried to guide my hands on the controller. I started to ask him what he was doing, and as if this wasn't uncomfortable enough, his hands moved from the controller and slid up under my shirt. That's when I really started to panic. I thought he was going to try to grope my chest, but instead, he started squeezing and massaging my belly. I was more than a little chubby back then. Freshman 15 and then some, so you can imagine what that might have been like. I dropped the controller in pure shock and quickly stood up, fixing my shirt. I was at a loss for words and he did nothing but smirk at me and tell me he liked it. I felt completely disgusted and violated. I'd had enough. I lied and told him that I had a group project to work on and needed to go. He asked where I lived so he could drop me off at home. Thankfully, I had the common sense to not tell him, and I asked him to drop me back to school instead, where I would be supposedly meeting my classmates. He obliged. After our very uncomfortable first date, I decided I didn't want to talk to Ken anymore. I didn't block him on MSN or on my phone, our only two methods of communication, but I rarely responded to his messages and I ignored all of his calls. Once, he messaged me on MSN around 11 p.m., asking me to come over and telling me that he would send a cab to bring me over to his place. Thoroughly annoyed, I responded, "What do you take me for? Why do you even think I would want to do that?" He replied saying, "No sex, I promise." Just bizarre. I was disgusted and didn't even respond. He continued trying to get in touch with me for months, then suddenly vanished. I figured he'd finally gotten the point. Now, I wish the story ended here, but it doesn't. I last heard from Ken in late February. He had stopped trying to contact me shortly after Valentine's Day. In April, Two nuclear family members and I went on holiday to visit another relative, who we'll call Anne, who was living in the Caribbean at the time. Anne, whom I loved dearly, was, and still is, a bit of an eccentric. She considers herself very spiritual and is an active member of a large, well-known spiritual organization. She is deeply connected with Motherland, more than the rest of us are, and goes back for frequent visits. While we stayed with her in the Caribbean, she told us about her most recent spiritual trip to Motherland, where she met a wealthy and well-connected local woman through the organization, who quickly became a very close friend. Let's call her Connie, the con artist. During our visit, Anne introduced us to Connie virtually over Skype, because Connie lives in Motherland. We chatted with her a couple of times throughout our vacation, via Skype, and got to know her a little bit. Little did we know back then that Connie, who Anne had spontaneously met halfway across the world in Motherland, would soon wreak utter havoc on our lives. Now, that's a story I'm just not, and may never be, ready to tell because of how many lives were affected and the severity of the damage that had been inflicted. What you need to know is that Connie was an outright criminal and con artist who had been targeting our family for long before Anne had actually met her. Their meeting was no coincidence. Not only did she manage to steal over $100K from our family, but she took any peace of mind or sense of security we had ever had. When we finally caught on and confronted her, she insisted that we were mistaken, but disappeared into thin air once we forced her out of our lives. You're probably wondering what on earth this has to do with my story about Ken. Well, get this. The situation with Connie lasted many months. The whole thing is kind of a blur to me now, but we first spoke to her online in April, and I remember the whole ordeal lasting well into the fall. Well, she normally resided in Motherland, and had invited her to visit and stay with us where we, my whole family and I, presently live. That's when things really took a turn for the worse. Some of the things I clearly remember, and are important to this story, were that, 1, the whole time she was staying with us, she was trying to convince me to transfer schools to a very obscure school and program in the US. I don't even live in the US. And was actually getting very pushy about it. And 2, she had asked me if I was a virgin, and told me to save myself from my husband. Disturbing, I know. During this time, I was so emotionally drained and stressed that I didn't really think of anything but the situation at hand. In fact, I had stopped socializing almost entirely, and even had started habitually skipping classes. I had lost contact with my high school friends, and my university friends were too new to really care, so my strange behavior and new destructive habits went unnoticed. Fast forward to one day, after Connie's final disappearance in the fall. I was at home with my dad when my cell phone rang. I looked at the caller ID, and it was a number I didn't have saved, so it was showing up the contact information as whatever name the phone was registered under. My heart dropped into my stomach. My phone displayed a name. The first name was a man's name, and the last name was the same last name as Connie's. I started to panic and ran into my bedroom to answer the call. I had no idea what to expect. When I picked up the phone, I was greeted by a familiar voice. It was Ken. I honestly thought I was going to puke when I came to a sudden realization that he had been part of this whole sick plot. Of course, I don't have hard evidence to prove that he was connected to Connie, but let me explain. The timing of his appearance and reappearance into my life, the last name, a fairly unique surname originating from the part of Motherland where Connie is from, and I had never known Ken's last name until then, and the fact that he contacted me out of the blue, and I had no idea why or how, were all just too bizarre to be a mere coincidence. Of course, I freaked out at Ken when he called, and I told him that he should never call me again. I would call the police. His response was just a weird, dry, half laugh, and then he said, "Well, okay then," in the most creepy voice you can think of, and hung up. I knew in my gut that this was their last attempt to get back in touch, and somehow slither their way back into mine and my family's lives. Thankfully, I never heard from Ken again after that day. A while after this all ended, I was having a conversation with a family member who was also closely involved in all this, about the whole ordeal, and she told me she'd sensed something extremely wrong with Connie, When she was pushing to have me sent off to the US, to that obscure school, she had an unshakable feeling that Connie was involved in some sort of human trafficking scene, and that if I left, she would never see me again. The horrifying pieces came together for me at that time. I was just too damn naive to have seen it before. The memories flooded back to me when I heard that. How Ken had told me, no sex, I promise, when he invited me over, and how Connie was telling me to remain a virgin. As I said, I had never told a soul about Ken, nor about the weird V-card conversation with Connie. I strongly and firmly believed that Ken had been some sort of player in Connie's game, and was just there to keep me away from guys and prevent me from having a boyfriend. For those who may be wondering, we never called the police on Connie or Ken, because nothing illegal happened, at face value. It's very hard to explain. I'll also mention that I tried to find Ken online many times after this all ended. I don't know why. I felt like I wanted to expose him or call him out, and was not able to find even a sliver of information on him. Not by the name Ken, nor by the name on the caller ID. It was as if he didn't even exist. Also, I am awful at directions, and didn't remember his address or where his house was exactly. I'm sorry if this story is convoluted or confusing. I'm trying to get my point across without giving any names or too many details, which makes it a little challenging. I hope this can serve as a warning to young people to never trust anyone. To do your thorough check on people, especially those you meet online, and to be very aware and weary of people's intentions. Also, from this incident onward, I can't stomach a lot of those spiritual organizations. I never liked the idea of them to begin with, but now I've truly experienced how they can attract both vulnerable people and also unsavory characters who are looking for someone vulnerable to prey on. No judgment for those who are into that sort of thing. It's just definitely not for me. I would like to hear what you guys think about this. Do you think my suspicions are plausible? What do you make of it? Stay safe, everyone. And to Ken and Connie, if I ever see either of you again, I'll kick you in the face. Rotten hell. Edit 1. I didn't think people would be so interested to know which country these scammers came from. This is a throwaway, so whatever. For all you who said India, you are correct. Edit 2. Part of the purpose of sharing this experience was to help others to potential dangers like these. I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't release this information. The spiritual organization was Art of Living, and this wasn't my first bad experience with them. Edit 3. I see AOL is getting a lot of attention here, and I think I need to be more clear and provide some more information. Connie was not an AOL leader, representative, or anything like that. She seemed to be a participant and lingerer, who was there under the false guise of wealthy, well-connected woman, as I mentioned. I have no doubt that these type of shady characters flock to places like AOL, looking for easy targets, but I am not sure if that speaks to the organization itself. I am not by any means saying that AOL was involved in the potential human trafficking scheme. My parents had just picked me, 9 or 10 years old, up from a softball practice, and I was pretty tired. Before going home, my parents stopped by a grocery store to shop for dinner. Since I was tired, I asked to stay in the car to take a nap. They agreed and let me, since they would be fast. I quickly drifted off to sleep, laying in the back seat of our little car. At some points I woke up, kinda groggy but with a tingling sensation. Chill ran down my spine. At first, I couldn't figure out why because I was still half asleep and a little out of it. I sat up and just started to look around but didn't find anything off. Then I heard a tapping noise. There was no one around but the tapping continued. In my half-awake state, I realized the tapping sound was coming from behind me, through the closed car window. I turned my head to see a creepy woman staring at me intensely. She was a methed out, high, homeless woman. She was grinning at me with her yellow and brown rotting teeth, the few that she had left anyway. Her translucent pale, yellowish skin was warped and stretched out, and burned in some places as if being pressed out in the sun for too long. Her arms were long and skinny, but also veiny. bruised and probably infected from the puncture marks running up and down both arms. Her skin looked a bit green, and pus was oozing and trickling out. Her nails were discolored, long, jagged, and broken. Dirty blonde hair was all over the place, badly cut and greasy. The most unnerving part, though, was she was heavily pregnant. Never mind that she was also barefoot and had white clothes stained with dried vomit in the front, and obviously had pissed herself on more than one occasion. Her outfit, looking back, kinda reminded me of a cult-like uniform. Anyway, this woman freaked me out. Like, where did she come from? What did she want with me? And who knows how long she had been watching me sleep. I wish I had done something like honk the car horn or started screaming, but the thing was, I was so scared I couldn't do anything. Thank God the doors were locked because she did try to open all of the doors. I don't know what she was thinking or planning to do, but it certainly was unnerving. She got frustrated, pounded on the windows, and was making low animal-like grunts, signaling her frustration at being unable to get in the car. Thank God by some miracle she eventually gave up and just wandered off. I told my parents what happened as soon as they came back. The lady was gone at this point. My parents got upset at me about what happened and just told me to go shopping with them next time. Safe to say, years later, I have never ran into or seen that woman again, and I hope to keep it that way. This story occurred in September of 2018 at one of my first college parties. Being the anxious wreck that I am in all social situations, I pre-gamed quite heavily to try to alleviate the anxiety I felt around my college friends and large parties in general. I took a few extra shots before we left since one of my best friends from home had been there with me that weekend. I was beyond excited to show her the social scene at my new university, and I didn't want to have any inhibitions once we rolled up. When we arrived, I was already much more inebriated than I had let on to any of the three friends I came with, but I was so eager to demonstrate how fun I could be in college that I ended up having a few more beers, quite a few more than I'd had in years. I promptly blacked out around midnight, so in telling the story I lose nearly all recollection of what actually happened to me. I have a flash of a memory where I'm leaving the party after it ended, being physically supported by my three friends in order to make the walk back to our dorm. Bless their souls. I lose most, if not all, of my memories at this point in the events. According to my friends, a man they had never met before, but who appeared to be around our age and relatively normal, walked up into the four of us as we were heading back to the dorm and began chatting with us. Nothing particularly out of the ordinary for a group of college girls on a Friday night, except for his intense fixation on me. Clearly much more intoxicated than the rest of the group. After a few minutes of innocuous conversation, he suddenly started encouraging me to go back with him to his apartment, telling my friends that I would make it home just fine, and that he was trustworthy. Apparently, I seemed interested in the idea for reasons that neither my friends or I can discern, slurring back a sure and cool every few sentences. To the best of my knowledge, I had no idea what in the hell he was talking about, and was just agreeing because my grasp of reality was total shit. My friends, of course, told him there was no way I'd be going with him, and attempted to walk away faster than he could keep up, but, like all bona fide creeps, he couldn't be deterred. For the entire 3 blocks away from my dorm, he escalated his behavior, and kept trying to talk to me, grab my arm, touch my hair, or just generally engage in predatory behavior. Then we arrived back at the dorm, which was locked to everyone that didn't have a key card specifically for the building. So my friends rushed inside with me in tow, thinking they had escaped the creepy guy. Instead of being locked out though, he tailgated so close to my arm that when my friends and I went through the doors, he followed immediately after. My best friend from home is far from afraid of confrontation, so she told him in no uncertain terms to fuck off and attempted to drag me to the elevator. I'm mostly unclear what happened here, but it seems that as the elevator was closing, he told me to come out, and for some reason, blackout drunk me thought that he was the authority on where I'd be going. I crept out of the elevator at the last second, and apparently, he ushered me out the door as my friends went up the 8 floors to my room, helpless to stop me from leaving. My memories kicked in here. I remember the second we got outside, there was an Uber waiting for us as if it had been there for a few minutes. I remember him opening the door and gently guiding me in. When we started driving, I think I asked him where we were going. I was gripped with a horrible anxiety, total disorientation, with the motion of the car stirring all my visuals outside. He told me we were going to his apartment 5 miles away, on the far west side of campus. I lived on south side at the time, so it was a fair distance. I don't remember much else from the car ride, except that it took nearly 20 minutes, and I kept asking him who he was and where we were going, because I couldn't remember. After getting out of the car, which I know we did, I have only one more memory, which is vomiting from being drunk for the first and only time in my life, with my vision and memory so impaired that I saw it only as an explosion of stars. According to my hometown friend, I called her crying about 20 to 25 minutes after he took me away from them at the dorm, sent her my location, and begged her to call me an Uber home, saying I didn't know where I was or who I was with. I don't remember that ride, but do remember collapsing into my friend's arms at the entrance to my dorm. Luckily, the timestamps and phone calls proved that nothing awful happened to me, but the experience was so nauseating that I haven't gotten that drunk since, nor do I think I ever will. This wasn't too awful of an experience, and I debated posting it here, but I think it demonstrates how sickeningly normal it is for average-seeming people to have potentially malicious intentions. I am infinitely grateful for how generous and vigilant my friends were in protecting me. The guy somehow found my Instagram a few days later and requested to follow me. I hadn't known his name until he did that, but luckily, now I do. And he will remain on my block list till the end of time. And boy, I hope we never meet again. For his sake. Because I promise I'm a lot stronger when I'm not alcohol poisoned. I've had a stalker for over 2 years. I, 27 female, have worked with people with disabilities since I was 19. I was born with a rare genetic condition, shout out to other zebras, and have been using my experience as a radical disability activist and advocate to help other people with disabilities in my community. During my time working in the disability community, I've been sexually harassed and assaulted several times by both men and women, physically assaulted and stalked more than once. When I first started working with the organization, I was working with my best friend's older brother, her older sister, and several of her aunts, uncles, and cousins. So in the beginning, I always felt safe. Like people would do anything to keep the creeps away from me. They would have. However, after several years, all my close friends slowly started leaving. Flash forward to a couple of years ago, when most of my closest friends were all gone, leaving me one of the most experienced and senior staff members, including all of management and the board of directors. I've had a lot of bad experiences in these past 2 years, with the stuff stated above, but the worst part has been the lack of support from management. So, within the last few years, a client that we'll call Leonard, 50s, male, started to chat with me at community events. We often have parties or events that we invite the entire community to. From the very first moment I met Leonard, I experienced chills creeping up and down my spine. Something about the way he looked at me has always made me super uncomfortable, to the point that I will do literally anything to get away from him, including helping folks in the bathroom. He's a really short, white guy, with shocking white hair, and these clear blue eyes that are just empty. He's always really smiley and soft-spoken. He started off innocent enough. He would corner me at parties and talk until I found a reason to slip away, but at some point, he managed to get my personal cell phone number from a coworker, still don't know who, and started calling me late at night and leaving long rambling messages. I never answered the phone, and after a while, he stopped. He would still periodically call me though, despite me asking him politely in person to stop. He started cornering me in the office too, when no one was around, so I had a difficult time getting away from him. Every time he cornered me, he would grab my arm or shoulder so I couldn't leave. More recently, like right before lockdown, He started calling the office and leaving messages on my work phone after hours. He wasn't even someone I personally worked with. I asked the coworker who did work with him to please ask him to stop, which she did. She spoke to him several times, but he would only ever stop for a week or two, and he always made a point to come and apologize directly to me, which almost always made me more uncomfortable. It started to get really bad about 3 weeks before I started working from home. He would forget his appointments, which were purposefully set on one day in the week. When I wasn't working in the office, he would come in the next day when he knew I was working. Then, he figured out when I got off and would come in to meet with my coworker right before I got off work and wait around till my shift ended. He started giving me little gifts, which I always refused. Every time, he would get really offended, so then he started writing me poetry. Instead of just handing it to me, he would grab me and read over my shoulder and point out what every single line meant. I always tried to get other coworkers to help me, but no one saw anything as weird or bad or unsafe, despite the warning bells going off in my head. Then, one day, he cornered me and said he wanted to take me to the train station, because I usually walked. I asked him if he meant he wanted to walk me to the 2 blocks. He shook his head and said, "No, I want to take you in my car, so I can keep a better eye on you." It gave me instant chills. I told him no, but he kept insisting that it would happen before he finally left. I'm a tiny, petite person, so the idea that he was following me long enough to know exactly which train station I went to, and the line I got on — there are several different lines going in several different directions, and even the direction I was going really freaked me out, enough to double up on the defensive measures I normally keep on me, including pepper spray and a taser. I told everyone. I told supervisors, HR, the associate director, everyone I could think of. I had several meetings with my direct supervisors where I explained everything that happened and why he was giving me the creeps, but they all just brushed me off. And one manager in particular said I was being too dramatic, and he was just a sweet older man doing nothing to harm anyone. Until the next time he came around, I told a couple of my coworkers, J and P, 28 male and 26 male, and they both agreed that one of them would always walk me out from now on. On cue, Leonard waited until after I got off, but J and P, who said they'd look out for me, were both super busy, so the associate director said he would walk me out, still not believing it was a big deal. We started walking and chatting like old friends, and the whole time Leonard followed us. The associate director had to literally yell at him to finally get Leonard to leave. Right then, he finally realized how serious the situation was getting. The next day, one of the managers, who was super rude and dismissive about the whole situation, pulled me into her office and profusely apologized. After Leonard was yelled at and went back to the office, the manager had a conversation with him that really creeped her out on my behalf. Apparently, he was saying things like, "My relationship with me is ours and has nothing to do with the organization. You have no right to tell me how to behave around her. She likes me and likes what I'm doing. I'm not making her uncomfortable. She needs me to watch out for her." That same day, the entire management team apologized for not taking immediate action, especially since this is not the first time stuff like this has happened to me. I just asked that from now on, I have absolutely no contact with him. I reiterated several times that I absolutely do not want an apology. I want nothing. Since then, I've learned that Leonard has harassed and assaulted an old coworker who had to file a restraining order against him. This was told to me by the manager, who originally dismissed my claims. She had dealt with the other situation, yet nothing was told to any of the other staff about this behavior. Not only that, she berated me in front of other staff for speaking out about my experience, saying it wasn't that big of a deal, even though she knew he'd done it before. If I never have to see that guy again, I will be eternally grateful. The situation was never fully resolved before lockdown. I'm very thankful I have been able to work from home, but I'm not sure how to proceed after restrictions are lifted, and I have to start going back again. I was thinking about filing a restraining order. My husband and family really want me to, but I've pretty much figured no one will take me seriously. When I was 11, almost 12, the woman living above me was a coke dealer. The night of my 12th birthday, she went missing. I would provide links to news coverage, but I'm not sure if that would break the rules. Not long after, her boyfriend came down to ask if he could use our phone. This was 2004, so having a cell phone was more of an exception than a rule, at least in my area. For a little context, I was home alone at the time while my mom was at work about a 5-minute walk away. My mom had let our neighbor and her boyfriend come in to use our phone several other times before, so I assumed nothing was wrong with it and let him in. Bring him into the living room, which is towards the front of our apartment, to use the phone in there. He picks up the receiver, dials a number, waits a few seconds, then hangs up the phone. He does this a couple more times before the front door of the building opens. You can easily hear the front door open from where we were. It's a heavy door, the walls are thin, and the way our building is set up, it's a small, old single-family house converted into apartments. My mom's apartment was the only on the first floor, and our upstairs neighbor's apartment was the only one above us. Irrelevant, but there was also a much smaller apartment below us. My neighbor's boyfriend looked at us, put his finger to his lips, like he was trying to shush me, and told me not to tell anyone he was there, before speed walking to my room at the other end of the apartment. I watched my bedroom door close, right before there was a loud, hard, cop-like knock on the door. My jaw dropped as I opened the door to see a cop. He asked if my neighbor's boyfriend was there, and, being scared, I stammered out, "Yeah, he just went into my room." The officer asked if he could come in, which I agreed to, and as he was coming in, he asked if I could let his partner in the back door and lead them to my room. We walked together to the back of the apartment and I let his partner in. The back door to the apartment was right next to my bedroom door, but we had to walk around the kitchen table to get there. There was just barely enough space between the two doors to fit a narrow, rectangular table against it without blocking the path to either door. After I let them into my room, I watched as they pulled my neighbor's boyfriend out of my bedroom closet, as they brought him out of my room and towards the back door, which just led to an enclosed fire escape. They told me to go wait in the living room while they brought him out the back door. I walked back to the living room and, after they closed the door, I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could hear the distinct sound of metal clicking and quickly realized that he had just been handcuffed. Still scared, I waited for the police car to drive away before grabbing my keys, making sure the back door was locked, and locking the front door on my way out before running to my mom's work, crying. Pretty sure I cut the 5-minute trip into about 2 minutes, and I've never been a fast runner. I was fueled entirely on adrenaline and fear at that point, and I just wanted my mom. When I told her what had happened, my mom was pissed that he had used me the way he had, hiding out in a child's bedroom closet, of all places, to try to keep the cops from finding him. She gave me a short but gentle lecture that night about not letting people in to use the phone, telling me that I was not to let people use our phone, even if I knew them, unless she was home. I don't know what exactly he was wanted for, nor do I want to know what would have happened if the cops had not shown up. I don't know if he had known that the cops were on their way and had come to my apartment specifically to hide from them, or if he was up to something else and knew it was the cops knocking at the front of the building. In a summer between my years in college, I moved in with my old high school friends. They had a place close to their campus and college party district in our hometown. I attended school in a different city and needed a place to stay while I worked over the summer. One roommate was going abroad, so more or less, I was subletting. The house they lived in was an older duplex in a corner lot. We lived in the bottom floor, and the top floor was always vacant. The house would have been a prime frat house in its heyday. It had a large porch on one side, large enough for couches and coffee tables. Could easily host 15 people on the porch alone. We spent many summer days and nights on that porch, drinking and playing music. It wasn't uncommon for us to exchange pleasantries, with people walking by on the sidewalk less than 10 feet from the porch. Most times, people going to a party would come around the corner and walk down our street to go to the bars and clubs. Friday and Saturday nights, the crowds would start around 8 p.m., so it's going one direction. Then the traffic would reverse around 12 a.m. Most college-age crowds, with the occasional transient bum or tweaker. Sometimes, random people would ask to come up and chill for a minute and shoot the shit. One evening in particular, a man happened to come walking by. I saw him come around the corner. He was older than the average college crowd, late 40s or early 50s. He sees me on the porch. I wave and say hey. He continues along the sidewalk in front of the porch. When he is closer, I can tell he looks weathered. Clothes look worn and old, hair a mess, beard and somewhat dirty, like he had been working outside. He pauses for a minute. I can't remember specifically why. I think he commented on the porch, or the weather, or something. I do remember that he asked for directions, like, is this the way he wants to go? I tell him he is on the right track. He makes a comment about having friends in the area, then just continues on his way. I don't think any more about it. It was a low-key night, midsummer, just one of those dog days. I think my buddy and I had a few beers, then decided to call it a night early, probably 10 or 11 p.m. So you understand the layout. My room is on the porch side of the house. It shares a wall with the front door, and a window to the porch with a wall to divide the bedroom from the main room. My friend's room is all the way to the back of the house, a good 30 feet from the front door. I dozed off easily, but was abruptly awakened by a slamming sound. At first, I thought my friend was up having a smoke, and maybe slammed the door mistakenly. Before I could make sense of it, I realized it was violent knocking on the door, like SWAT team style knocking. Still being a bit in a daze, I'm like, what the fuck is going on? As the third round of knocks shakes the wall, I peek from behind the curtain in my room, out to the porch, and can see the same guy from earlier banging on the door. He seems out of it, uneasy on his feet, and obviously stirred up about something. He starts yelling to let him in. No way. I drop the curtain and reach for my piece, because we are past the point of having a conversation, and I'm feeling like the door may not hold. I thought to myself I don't have time to call the cops because if this guy comes through the door, my room is the first stop. I go out to the living room about 10 feet back from the door as the fourth barrage begins. He is yelling more now. Sounds like he is asking someone to open the door by name. This time, I responded with, "You got the wrong house," thinking that maybe enrage him more, or help him get a clue. The banging stops momentarily, like a decision is being made. I hear shuffling, but can't tell if he is leaving or just moving around. Suddenly, one more loud burst of knocking, so I give him the same response, this time fully prepared to defend myself if the door swings open. It doesn't. Then silence. Then a few seconds of nothing. Then more silence. Apparently, that was his last effort. I went back to the window. He was gone. Or at least I couldn't see him. Don't think I slept that night. Thinking it might just be the first of the night. Fortunately, that was it. I talked to my friend in the morning. He was completely unaware. He said he thought he heard something but nothing alarming. Goes without saying, lock your doors and, for me at least, be prepared. I was reminded of this story from when I was younger and decided to tell it. When I was about 12, I was at a friend's house. Her parents were going out and she didn't want to be alone, so we walked down the street back to my house. As we got closer to my house, we noticed a large SUV running in my driveway, but with the lights off. She asked if I knew who it was. I did not. With her parents not being home, we continued to my house and noticed a man in dark clothing, holding a flashlight and shining it into some windows at the side of the house. For some reason, we weren't scared. We just thought it was weird. I thought maybe it was someone looking for my mom or my dad. Wanting to be sure, we waited until we were certain the guy had gone around back, and we got into the house through a side door in the garage as quietly as we could. We locked the doors, just to be safe, and the first thing I did was grab the phone to call my mom. She didn't pick up. I called my dad, and he answered. I said, paraphrased of course, "Dad, are you expecting someone at the house?"
No, why?
He responded, obviously confused. That's about when I started to get nervous. Is Mom?
think so. Why? Is someone at the house?
I explained the SUV in the driveway and the flashlight and how we ran inside to call him.
Okay, I'm on my way. I'll be there in 5 minutes, and I'm calling the cops.
My dad said, obviously trying to remain calm. When we hung up, my friend stayed at the kitchen table, obviously super nervous. I went to our front window, which faced the driveway, to check and see if the car was still there. I opened the curtain, and there he was, staring directly into the window, right at me. He was so close that, had the glass not divided us, he could have grabbed me. My stomach completely dropped, and I froze. This man held my gaze for way too long, and just as casual as anyone could be, he turned around, quickly got into his car, and drove off. And that was it. Naturally, we stopped hanging out at my house alone after that. I've been in a lot of scary and uncomfortable situations, but opening my curtain to that man on the other side is, to this day, one of the most terrifying things I have ever witnessed. This happened 25 years ago. I was 17 years old, 5 foot tall, and at the most 95 pounds soaking wet. On this day, I was driving a few friends home after spending all day at the lake. Because of this, I was wearing a bikini with some cut-off shorts. I was just about to drop off my last passenger, who was in the back seat, and head home. I had just come off the freeway and turned on the main road in town. As I pulled up to a red light, there was an ambulance in the lane to my left pulling up alongside me. Shortly after the light turned green, and we all moved forward, I heard the whoop of the siren. I checked my mirrors, and then looked to my left and saw the ambulance driver had his window down and was yelling at me, telling me to pull over. I was confused as the siren had only been on for a small moment. I wondered if I'd somehow missed seeing their lights on, that maybe they needed me to pull over so they could pass for an emergency. I was even more surprised and confused when the ambulance pulled up right next to me, and the driver got out and approached my door. He then asked me to step out of the vehicle to speak with him. I was confused, so I asked why I was being pulled over. He again asked me to step out of the car with my license and registration. I grabbed my license and registration out of the glove compartment and stepped out of the car and said, I didn't think an ambulance could pull you over. My friend in the back seat, that moment piped up, saying, this is bullshit. The driver's eyes grew wide and he leaned in the car window, telling my friend to shut up unless he'd like to be in a pair of cuffs. I asked again why he was pulling me over. This wasn't like any time I'd been pulled over in the past, and the looks the ambulance driver had been giving me until now were making me feel incredibly uncomfortable. I felt very exposed, so I brought my arms up to over my chest. The hair on my arms were standing on end and my gut was churning. The driver told me he pulled me over due to my car not having a front license plate. He wouldn't have seen that until he had pulled up and gotten out of the vehicle, but I did have one in the front passenger side of the windshield, as I didn't have a place to attach a license plate in front of my car. I tried to point out I had one in the windshield, but he kept saying how much trouble I was in and that he needed my driver's license and registration. He then kept talking over me and yelling at me for any of my questions. He sounded incredibly angry. He eventually made a big deal of telling me I was so lucky he was letting me off with a warning, and that I better not let it happen again. The whole thing was bizarre and left me feeling nervous and off balance. Looking back at everything, it felt like he was trying to keep me scared so I wouldn't question things. He didn't have a name tag on or show me a badge. He didn't have any official ticket paperwork. I didn't see a partner in the ambulance. I really feel he was counting on my youth and insecurity and fear to keep me compliant. I also think I was lucky to have a friend in the car to witness everything. I feel like that put a stop to whatever was in the driver's mind and made him angry. I remember going home so worried about everything, analyzing everything about the encounter, and freaking that he had my personal information. I was already living on my own and not close to my family at that time, so I didn't feel I had anyone I could talk to about it. I calmed down a bit once I remembered that my ID and registration were not up to date. I had moved twice that year and hadn't updated anything yet. This was in the mid-90s, so no online databases like there are now. The whole thing freaked me out. When my family moved into a single-wide trailer on Brightwood Street, I was a child of 6 and completely trusting and unaware, had a big heart for such a little chest. I knew nothing of evil and demons. Sadly, my childhood would then spoil like milk. Looking back, when I was little, I had the worst of luck. I was always spilling something or breaking things. It truly seemed like I had a dark cloud following me. My dad, who was angry all the time, would lose his patience because of my clumsiness. He was big and scary and would scold me when I cried, scare me when he was angry, and hurt me because I wore my heart on my sleeve. When my mother had my baby brother Wesley, I could tell my father preferred him over me. There was just something about me he didn't like. One warm summer day, I had been pleading to go outside. I could hear the other neighborhood kids playing just next door and I wanted to play too. My dad gave in after what seemed like forever. I recall it making me mad. All he had to do was sit outside on the porch. I don't remember much of what was said between us, but I must have mouthed off. Before I even closed the trailer door, my dad was opening it. I turned to him already frightened. I was trying to say I was sorry. His big meaty hand quickly grabbed me by my arm. I remember being airborne and landing on the couch. I remember holding my arm against myself because the pain was awful, but my second mistake was approaching. Crying in front of my dad was never a good thing, and that day, it set him off like a bottle rocket. I was so choked up from it all that I was having a hard time breathing. I was trying to wipe the tears away, but I couldn't. My arm was hurting, yet he stood towering over me, his face beet red. To this day, I wonder how my own mother couldn't tell something bad had just happened. How couldn't she tell I was frightened and choking down tears? How couldn't she notice me pleading silently for her to save me? Yet she simply left me. Time passed and that summer gave way to fall. On those nights, my parents had excuses to send my brother and I off to bed early. I hated bedtime like any kid. One night after I had finished watching the Muppets show, my mama kissed my forehead. "Good night, I love you," she said. Then she turned me gently toward the dark hallway that led to my room. I looked over my shoulder. "Go on, it's okay," she said patiently. "Fine," I said quietly. Begrudgingly, I stomped off. I climbed my little ladder and flung myself into my bunk. With nothing to do, I grabbed Oscar, my teddy bear, and proceeded to sulk. There were no tablets back then. From the top bunk, I'd often be left to stare into the shadows of my room and closet. My room's closet was missing its sliding doors. Some nights the moonlight would shine brightly through my window, and I could make out most everything. So that night, after what seemed like forever, I fell asleep. But soon after I had a nightmare that Waldorf and Stadler from the Muppets were staring at me from my closet. I shook my head and realized I was just seeing things. A few nights later, there was a thunderstorm outside, and I heard it booming as I laid in bed, squinting trying to make out Beaker of the Muppets. But the lighting was all I had for light. I was hoping for Beaker. I related to him the most. Suddenly I noticed something move. Something big. I sat up in bed startled, then watched several of my clothes fall down to the floor from their hangers. The thunder roared outside and lightning followed. There was something in there. It had form, yet it didn't, and it was completely silent. Frightened, I ducked under my sheets with Oscar. I felt the weight of something enormous leaning against my bunk bed. I had tried calling out to my brother, "Wesley, Wesley," but I became disheartened when I realized he had gone to bed with Dad. The whispering began. All I remember hearing was, "Hello, Kyle." Just my name, and I was covered in goosebumps. They ran the length of my body. I could feel its breath against my sheets. The monster had come so close to me, and I was trying to move away, but the bunk bed was against the wall. There was nowhere to go. My thoughts were running wild. What is this? I thought. What kind of monster would be in my room? I was terrified and started screaming my head off. The demon was gearing up. When no one came, I waited a while. But before I had the courage to make myself look, I made Oscar look first. Then I slowly pulled back the blanket. It had gone. And I needed to pee badly. This event would be the origin for the nightmares that would plague me for the rest of my life. Each night at bedtime, I would begin checking every shadow. every weird pile of clothes, every creak of the floorboards until I was satisfied that there was nothing there, and fall asleep with my back against the bedroom wall. When I tried to wake myself up from a nightmare, I couldn't. My muffled cries for help would just not give way to real tears, and it was torture. It would seem like forever until I finally came out of it. Eventually it was bad enough that I would soak my pajamas in sheets. I had no clue that this would become night terrors that I'd wrestle with for the rest of my life. One night in particular, I was having a terrible nightmare that the robot from Scooby-Doo had taken hold of me and would not let go. Luckily, the nightmare ended. I was done, and I wanted my mom. The problem then was I had to run past the middle bedroom. The trailer had a long hallway, and being an 8-year-old kid, it might as well have been 100 miles long. The middle bedroom had no light bulb or even a curtain to let in moonlight. It was pitch black. I was always scared of that room. I just knew that some night something would get me. But I was still determined to make that run, and I grabbed my bear, got down from the bunk bed, and bolted down the hall. I envisioned myself making it past that room, and then the world turned on its head. A long, drawn-out voice from the darkness called out to me. It was just enough for me to stop dead in my tracks. I dropped my bear, and my body froze. My inner voice was screaming at me to run. Why wasn't I running? From inside the darkness, a giant hand came out and grabbed me by the back of the pajamas. I was struggling to find my voice. I couldn't scream loud enough. The monster had me, and it had started to pull me in. I tried to hold onto the doorframe and call out again. I was going to disappear into the darkness. Then I heard my father's voice. "Kyle." He picked me up with ease, and his 2 giant hands turned me to him. He shook me hard, a little too hard. My body went limp. I thought my head came off. It was him hiding in the middle room closet. That was his idea of a practical joke. He put me down in the hallway and was angry again, because of course I had peed myself, but I couldn't hear him berate me, because I could see that ever so slightly behind him, there was another darkness. This one felt familiar. The demon swayed back and forth in the shadows like it was in some ghostly rocking chair. Then years passed, and I grew up. A lot has happened to me, some of it really bad in my younger years. One may ask, what's left of the little boy in the bunk bed? Well, he's still with me, buried deep down. He and I have grown distant because of the grief and pain, and I must say, he's the stronger one of us. Because he can't forget the cold nights in the trailer, and he bears the burden of the darkness and evil that came for us. The monster I thought was in my closet was the demon that I was born with. Still whispers at night, still calls my name. So about 2 years ago, a friend of mine had moved into his own apartment. The sofa that was in it was old and worn, so he decided that he would try and find one in better condition. He asked me to help him look for one, as my dad had a van, and we would need to use that to transport the sofa. So we went on Craigslist to have a look at what other people had for sale. We came across one ad that stated a 3-seater cream leather sofa, great condition, free to first viewer. There was a picture of it, and it looked in perfect condition. Now the ad had been up for a week, so we thought that maybe it was already gone, and that they just hadn't taken the ad down yet. So my friend contacted the seller, and almost instantly got a reply saying that they still had the sofa, and it was available if we could collect it. I was a bit weary that it was still available. I mean, a free sofa in perfect condition that had been up for a week, and nobody has taken it yet? I thought that maybe there was something wrong with it that could only be noticed when viewing the sofa. That was maybe hidden from the pictures. It was a weekend, and we had no plans, so we decided that we would go and check out the sofa. My friend contacted the seller back and organized a time and place to meet up. They decided on a local McDonald's car park at 9 p.m., as the seller said that he was at work until 8 p.m., and would need time to get ready after work. The seller said that he would be driving a green Honda Accord with a trailer. So we pull up to the McDonald's car park at about 8:50 p.m. There was loads of people around, so we had no reason to think that we would be in danger or anything. At about 8:55, my friend got a text saying that the seller was about 15 minutes away. and they asked him to describe what vehicle we were in, so he described the van that we were in to him. About 5 minutes after we had texted the seller what vehicle we were in, an overweight man around 50 years old with a gray scruffy beard and greasy gray hair approached the driver's side window of the van, which was my side, as I was driving the van. He was wearing a plain white t-shirt with what looked like food stains all over it, with black jeans with holes torn in them, and dried mud stains all over them, along with a pair of black steel toe cap boots, also covered in dried mud. He knocked on my window, so I rolled it down a bit. "You boys here for the sofa?" He said in a gravelly voice. It sounded like he needed a cough, but couldn't get it out. Yeah," I said to him. "Rob's car is broken down just down the road and his phone battery has died. I was with him and I walked up to get you guys. He's with the car waiting for AA, but you can come down and collect the sofa off of him." Me and my friend looked at each other, unsure what to think. "Can I get in the van and we'll go back to Rob together?" the guy asked. "How far down the road is he?" I asked before he replied. "Not too far, but I need to show you where to go." At this stage, my friend pretended to get a phone call. "Hello? Yeah. No way, really? We'll be right there," he said before pretending to hang up his phone. He looked at me and said, "We gotta go. My dad needs us to help him with his flat tire." I nodded, knowing that it was a fake call for us to get the hell away from this creepy guy. "We have to go now, but we'll contact you tomorrow about the sofa." The guy just stared at us as I rolled up my window and started to drive away. Me and my friend looked at each other. That was creepy. I got bad vibes off that guy. My friend said definitely. We decided to drive around the back of the car park to see if we could find out if the guy was up to something or not. We could see him standing in the same spot where we left him, and he was on the phone. He put his phone down, and about 2 minutes after that a car pulled up with 3 men in it, and he got in. My friend's phone started ringing and it was the number of Rob, the guy who was supposedly giving away the sofa. He answered.
"Hey, can you meet tomorrow? And I can hold on to the sofa for you until then?"
As he was on the phone, I noticed one of the men in the car that had collected the creepy guy was also on the phone. My friend told Rob that he would contact him tomorrow, that he was busy and couldn't talk right now. At the same time that my friend hung up the phone, the guy who was in the car also finished his phone call. At this point, I explained that to my friend that there was probably no car that had broken down, and that creepy guy was trying to lure us to something or somewhere, so the guys in the car could do God knows what to us. We drove home, and my friend blocked the number of Rob, and we never heard from them again. We reported the ad, and it was removed the next day. I was a high school student, living with my mother in a third-floor apartment. I used to sleep in the living room because the apartment only had one bedroom, and it was my mom's. I was happy with that little space I had. I was a happy kid. I always got up at 6 a.m. to go to school, and my mom always got up at 5 a.m. to have time to shower and make breakfast before dropping me at school and heading to work. That morning, I woke up and all the lights were on, every single one of them, even the one in my room. I went to grab my phone and it wasn't there. Odd. I headed to the bathroom and saw all the drawers and doors of every furniture we had were open. I was deeply confused. Anyways, my mom came out of the bathroom and asked me what the hell I've been doing. I told her I didn't know what she was talking about, and that I thought she did that since she is always up earlier than me. I also asked if she'd seen my cell phone. Then I saw it, deep inside her green eyes, the realization. I could see the fear and all the pieces inside her head clicking in place. She leaped to the kitchen and found the window wide open, a kitchen knife on the ground, and some dusty fingerprints on the wall where someone put weight on it to climb inside. It was then, when my sleepy head put the pieces together too. Someone, somehow, climbed all the way up our balcony, got inside the apartment and robbed us, all while I was asleep in bed, right there in the living room. She hugged me and asked if I was okay. I said I never heard anything, didn't even wake up when this unknown person turned the lights on and rummaged through our stuff. It was super weird. I've had the lightest sleep since I can remember, and still do, many years later. They didn't dare to open my mom's bedroom door so she didn't notice a thing. My grandma says that some angel protected me in my sleep and that's why I didn't wake up. But I don't believe in that stuff. I don't think they knew I was there either. Police never found the robber, and we put steel bars on the window. We moved anyways, sometime after that. This happened when I was still in high school. At least 6 years have passed. My mother and I moved from that apartment. Now I'm grown up and living with my boyfriend, but until today, I'm still paranoid and keep wondering why I didn't wake up, though I'm grateful that I didn't. This was some years ago. I was 16. I'm in my early 20s now, and I live in Egypt. Our manner of transportation here also includes a microbus, you can Google it, and a minivan or microbus, which is about 3 seats in front, 3 in the back, and the driver's seat. I was coming back from my high school with my certificate, and my father told me prior to get some specific bread from a supermarket that was 20 minutes away, so I thought, why not? I went to get some more bread and toast for me at the market. It was Ramadan, around noon, so I was fasting and thirsty. So I thought I might as well get a ride back home. I see the small microbus, and I wave and ask if he's going the same way as I. The driver says yes. As I open the door, I saw the first flag. They were seated in a very specific positioned way. I'm going to try to describe it, but please excuse me if I do it wrong. In the back seat, there's a guy on the left and a guy on the right leaving a seat in the middle. In the front, there was one guy sitting on the left. That leaves the middle back seat and middle and right front seat, which is liftable so you can get access to the back seat. The second red flag is that if I remember correctly, they were trying to avoid looking at me but not in a nonchalant way, almost on purpose. The third red flag is when I greeted them. They greeted me the same way back, almost in sync. My gut feeling at this point was telling me to run the hell away from there, but I thought I was just being a coward. It's noon, and I was a kid, and I didn't want to be judged or inconvenience the driver, so I took a deep breath and jumped in the back in the middle seat between the two strangers. The car took off, and I started to get out some money, and I asked the driver how much he wants, and then I saw him go beyond where he was supposed to go. In the middle of me telling him he's going the wrong way, I was interrupted by the front seat getting dropped by the dude in the front, and him sitting on it backwards to look at me. Guy on my right drew his gun and cocked it while the one on the left had his pocket knife in my hip. I simply panicked and started to say weird things, the usual in these situations like please don't harm me and such, and I more or less was just getting everything out of my pocket. I had a bad Nokia phone with a barely working screen, 13 pounds, which isn't much, but can get you a day's breakfast and a lot of bread. The guy in the front nodded at me as I gave him the phone, and I asked him if I can have back the SIM card, which he did give me back, and he gave the phone to the driver, who laughed at me saying something like, "Lucky son of a bee." This is where things take a turn for the funny. Not at the time, obviously. I had a gun and a knife at my hips. When the guy on the left saw how little money I had, he gave it back to me, and when I asked the front guy if I can have the bread, I have no idea why I asked him, since my father would kill me if I returned home without it. When they made sure I had nothing else, they opened the door for me, and the guy with the gun on my right told me to wait and asked where my wallet was. I don't carry a wallet, but I forgot that I don't, so I looked for it in my back pocket and didn't find it. I told him the other guy took it, and he basically picked a fight with him, yelling something akin to, "Did you snatch the wallet for yourself?" And when I finally got out, the guy with the gun said, "If you look back, you'll get shot." Obviously scared as hell I didn't. I walked the rest of the way home, shocked and scared to hell, but numb at the same time. When I got home, I cried and shouted my lungs out, and blamed my father, for no obvious reason. I was just scared. And he basically got dressed and told me to come to the police department with him. I was too afraid to go outside of my house, so I refused, and he went alone to report it. Later, he convinced me to go with him to look at possible suspects' pictures. I did not remember their faces, so I have no idea if their pictures were there or not. I was so afraid for years after that to get near any public transport, let alone deal with strangers. But I eventually got over my fears with the help of my friends, and I can go home around 2 or 3 a.m. alone. I also learned to never choose another person's feelings over my gut feelings. I'd rather be wrong and be a selfish a-hole. then be in a compromised position, because all I kept thinking of was, what if I was a girl? What if they weren't just robbers, but something worse? I'm a 31-year-old woman. This happened a few years back. I was walking from a friend's house to meet my son's father, X, at a bar we frequented in those days. It was winter, icy, and snowing with giant piles of snow all around. I was walking from a friend's house around 9 p.m. down an alley that served as a driveway area for many houses. Not a great neighborhood, but not particularly bad either. I was wearing my apocalypse boots, waterproof, knee-high, winterproof. I usually have headphones in blaring music while I walk, but that night, for some reason I decided not to. In hindsight, it's probably what saved me. I'm about the equivalent of 2 or 3 blocks away from the bar. There's a younger guy, early 20s, walking about 50 feet behind me. Hey you. I turn around. It seems he's talking to someone. Hey. I look back, then continue walking. Yeah, you. No, don't turn around, sweetheart. I start to walk faster as I realize he's getting closer. Ahead of me, I see an SUV running, backed out of a parking spot but blocking my path. I turn around. There's another guy. The door to the SUV opens and there's a couple of guys in it looking at me. One gets out and stands by the open door. I turn to look at the guy behind me. Out of nowhere, about 5 more guys come out, surrounding me from a distance, slowly closing in. The realization that they were hiding behind piles of plowed snow hits me. I realize they are just standing and watching me. A couple of them had their phones out and were recording something that was about to go down. Nobody was smiling, but they were closing in on me, trying to get me to walk to the SUV. Fight or flight kicked in, and I decided I didn't want to know what was about to happen. I wanted to catch them off guard, so instead of running forward, I bolted to the left. Thank God for those boots. I could run across the ice no problem. I ended up cutting through a few yards and luckily made it to the bar safely. Short background. I, 24 female, have been dating my boyfriend since I was 15. The first 6 years of our relationship had been kinda long distance. I used to go visit him on weekends, and it would take me around 2 hours by bus or train to reach the station, which he would come pick me up. This story takes place when I was 18, so I was quite used to public transportation by then, and I was aware of the creeps and weirdos one would encounter when traveling. Nothing really creepy had ever happened to me apart from the usual stares and unsolicited, "Hello, beautiful." One Saturday morning, I got on the usual train for the last 15 to 20 minutes of my trip, after traveling for 1.5 hours by bus. I always tended to seat either close to the other girls or to families with children. This one time the train carriage was quite empty, so I sat across of a young guy with flamingos on his t-shirt and a laptop. I don't really remember who the other people in our carriage were. That seat just looked like the safest one. Shortly after the departure, another guy entered the carriage and sat down next to me. He looked 25 to 30 years old. He was wearing some dirty old clothes, and he smelled like sweat and possibly booze. He said hi, and I said hi. As I wrote before, I was quite used to weirdos talking to me on buses and trains, so I didn't immediately feel like I was in danger. In my experience, it was usually better to engage on a short and meaningless conversation than ignoring them completely. He asked what my name was, and I made one up. Then he asked why I was traveling all alone, and I said my boyfriend was waiting for me at the following station. I hoped this would be enough to make him desist, but I was so wrong. He started telling me that he had just gotten a new phone, and he had lost all of his friends' numbers. He asked me to give him my number, so he'd have someone to talk to at night. I know, what the fuck. I politely declined. At that point, I was starting to feel very uncomfortable, but my stop was only 5 to 10 minutes away, and I still thought he was going to give up and leave. He insisted on me giving him my phone number and started getting closer to me. At this point, I stopped answering his questions and looked in the opposite direction. This must have bothered him because he suddenly put his dirty hand on my thigh to get my attention. I was terrified, but I managed to utter a shaky, "Don't touch me." I wish I had yelled it, but I didn't, and no one in the carriage noticed what was going on. Not even the flamingo guy who was literally in front of us. Or maybe he did notice and didn't care at first. The guy didn't take his hand off of me and I was petrified. I don't remember if he said something else at that point, because I was focused on his hand on my jeans. I gained some more courage and managed to tell him to leave me alone in a slightly louder voice. I guess that some people started looking in our direction in that moment because he suddenly got up and left. I started crying for the relief as soon as he exited the carriage. The flamingo guy asked if I was okay and if I needed him to call someone. I said I was fine. I tried to call my boyfriend, but he didn't answer because he was driving to come pick me up. I thought it was over. The train started slowing down and I got up in order to get off. Little did I know that the creepy guy was almost probably keeping an eye on me from the window of the carriage door after he left. I got off the train and started to look around hoping to see my boyfriend, who would sometimes wait for me on the platform. At that point, I noticed that the guy had stepped off the train as well. As soon as we made eye contact, he started walking towards me. I felt my heart drop. I turned around and started walking quickly towards the stairs, hoping he would lose me in the crowd. As soon as I reached the underground corridor, I started running. I got to the other side of the tunnel. I ran up the stairs and towards the restrooms. I don't know why I didn't run to the main hall instead. I was panicking, and I just went for the first place that came to my mind. I locked myself in one of the cubicles, made sure it was closed, and then got up on the toilet so he wouldn't see my feet. I was wearing a pair of quite recognizable boots. 20 to 30 seconds later, I heard someone come in and hastily try all the door handles. Of course, it could have been anyone, but I'm convinced it was him. It just made no sense for anyone else to try to open all the doors like that. I remember feeling my heart beat in my throat while I was waiting for him to leave. I remained still and silent for what felt like ages until I heard him walk away. At that point, I started crying again and finally managed to call my boyfriend and tell him I was locked into one of the toilet stalls. When he got there and I came out of the stall, I was shaking uncontrollably, but he somehow managed to calm me down. When we got out of the restrooms, there was no sign of the guy, and I never saw him again. Looking back now, I know I should have reported him to the authorities, but I stupidly thought that they wouldn't believe me, or that they were going to shrug it off as not a big deal. After all, nothing really bad had happened on the train, and I had no proof that it was him trying to open the stall doors. This experience made me avoid trains for a while, and even though after some time I managed to overcome my fear, I really hope I never meet him again. When I was younger, every year for Christmas I would drive upstate to my aunt's house along a stretch of highway. I cannot for the life of me remember the name of this road. All I know is it runs nearby Akron, New York, at some point. However, most of the drive is through rural areas, with little to no towns nearby. So, it was the dead of night and my groggy self had gotten off a long shift, and had to drag my ass to my aunt's house, since my extended family was expecting me the following morning. Near halfway through the drive, I realized I was low on gas, which irritated me. My brother told me he had filled it up the day before, so he either forgot, or he was straight up lying. I saw an archaic looking sign for a gas station off the next road. It wasn't an official road sign, literally a pole with a slab of metal attached with gas off next exit, or something along those lines painted on. That seemed a little sketchy, but people do the same thing with fruit stands on highways, so whatever. I pulled off the next exit on some dilapidated country road through dense woods. The whole thing was creepy and surreal. I kept expecting Leatherface to come running out of the trees with a chainsaw. Anyways, eventually I came to the gas station and realized quickly it hadn't been open for years. It was all rusted and the convenience store's roof was caving in. The gas pumps had all been taken out as well. I pulled over next to it and checked my gauge. I would probably only make it another half mile before running out, so I called AAA, and they said they'd send a truck over. Now I played the waiting game. I left my engine on because when the headlights were off, everything was pitch black and my paranoid self wasn't sitting next to an abandoned gas station in the middle of a forest in complete darkness. So most of the wait went uneventful until I sensed movement around the side of the old store, where my lights are pointed. I look up, but didn't see anything more, so I looked back down at my phone. Then over the sounds of the night, I hear someone yell, "Hey buddy, come here," in a demanding tone. I look up, and I shit you not, there's a dude standing by the old store, looking towards me, illuminated by my headlights. He looked like the run-of-the-mill homeless guy. I was honestly spooked, and figured he must have been squatting there. Still watching him, I rolled down my window and yelled something like, "Yeah, what's up?" Still mentally crapping myself. I had my foot ready to floor it out of there at the first sign of trouble. "You got any change?" "No, I don't. Sorry, man." I look up at him. He has this kind of vacant expression and is standing stiff. Then I see more movement. There are heads, about 20 or so heads, peeking around trees beyond the man I'm talking to. I can't see them clearly at all, but they are definitely people. Literally just heads, staring in my direction from around the trees. I see another guy beginning to walk around the gas station, and then I turned around and sped off. I got as far away from that place as my tank could carry me, and updated AAA on my location. The driver came back over and filled me up, and I didn't say anything. But after he left, I wanted to call the cops, so I called the nearest town's sheriff department. They said they'd send a trooper over, and I gave them the location. When I got to my aunt's house, they called me back and said whoever was there was gone, but they could tell a large number of people had been living there for a while. Blankets, canned food, the usual. The whole situation still freaks me out, but frankly, I can consider myself lucky I'll always have a creepy story to tell. I'm just glad nothing bad happened. To give you a little background, I have a nervous tic where I laugh at the most awkward and inappropriate moments. I've always said that I would probably laugh even if someone is causing me physical harm. Now to the actual story. My family and I owned a small business in a not so great part of town. One day I was just eating my sandwich and watching The Young and the Restless as I did every day with a coworker. Also, we were only two there at a time. I looked up and saw a figure peering through the display window, but I just assumed they were checking out the awesome display my mom put in there, because sometimes people only came to see what creative display she had come up with that season. They suddenly opened the door and shut it, and I thought, that's odd. So I stand up to see what's going on. That's when I see a tall figure with a full face bandana mask on with only eyes and a mouth cut out. He comes through the door and demands us to give him the money. Naturally I freak out, but I have always been told to just give them what they want and don't protest to it, which is what I had planned on doing. Next thing I know, my coworker stands up and says run as she's running towards the back. So I was like, okay, and ran too. I went through the back door assuming she was right behind me, and I get all the way to the back of the driveway and turn around to see she's not there. So then I start panicking like, where is she? I'm just sitting there like a dumbass because honestly, I don't even know what to do at this point, and still trying to process what the hell just happened. I start walking down to the bank on the road beside us to tell them to call the cops since I left my cell phone inside. Then I hear a deep-voiced man say take me to the money in a hateful tone. I turn around, and there's a man pointing a gun at me, so I just say okay. Well, freaking out obviously, and go with him. I then start laughing like some kind of crazy person and he gets agitated. He then yells at me to walk faster with the gun pointed at my back, so I tell him I'm sorry. Which, why the hell should I be sorry? So I give him the whole $50 that we had in our register, and he takes me to the back and tells me to stand there and count to 20. So I do what he says. Then yell for my coworker trying to figure out where the hell she went. Like, did they have her or what? No worries though. She was safe hiding in the bathroom. The cops never found who did it, but they didn't actually seem too concerned since he only got $50. Never mind the fact someone had to go through a traumatic experience. Also a side note, I had posted on Facebook that I would probably say I'm sorry to someone even if they were trying to rob me 2 days before this happened. Luckily, this was a while ago, and I have less anxiety about it than I used to. Although, due to the virus, all these people wearing bandana masks lately has me on edge. This happened 6 years ago, and will haunt me for the rest of my life. I grew up in one of the most densely populated neighborhoods in all of North America. The neighborhood was initially supposed to have 12,000 people, but by the time I was 12 years old, it had a population of around 30,000. It was one of Toronto's poorest neighborhoods, with 50% of the population being under the poverty line, though the crime rate was not nearly as high as you'd expect it to be. The neighborhood was mostly made up of immigrants and refugees looking to find a better life, my family included. It was summer break between 5th and 6th grade, and my cousins, who happened to live in the same apartment complex, were at our place watching movies. I was getting hungry, so I grabbed some money and headed for the convenience store to get snacks. It was around 7 p.m., so the sun was still up, and there was an hour and a half left of light. The convenience store was a half block away, so I walked it. When I got to the parking lot of the residential building the store was in, I noticed a man wearing a black hoodie with horizontal green stripes standing in the corner of the parking lot. There was nothing too noticeable about the man, except that he was smoking directly under a no smoking sign. Nothing uncommon in that neighborhood, just kind of ironic. I walk up the steps and into the cramped convenience store. There might have been 7 people in there, but it looked as if it was already almost full. Probably as big as a mid-sized apartment, and was already stocked up to the ceiling. Point is, if anyone enters, everyone in the store knows, so I come in. And directly to the left of the entrance is a shelf packed with many different varieties of candy. I was like any other child who has 20 different varieties of candy laid out in front of them, but only has the budget for 2, lost in thought. At the moment, I forget about the man who was smoking. He enters through the door. He walks into the nook of the store behind me, where they keep all the flatbread. I can feel his gaze on the back of my head. I quickly decide on the snacks, pay, and leave. I walk out, down the steps, and to the sidewalk on the other side of the narrow parking lot when I hear the chimes of the exit door. I glance behind me to see who is exiting the store, and I am a shade under petrified when I see the man exit the store, especially when I notice he is carrying nothing in his hands. I quicken my pace just a tad, and reason with myself that he just bought another pack of cigarettes and just put it in his pockets. That idea has barely crossed my mind by the time I am halfway back to my building. I turn around to see if he is still there. He's maybe 15 feet away from me when we make eye contact. He has his hood off, and I can see his face clearly. He looks to be Afghan. There were a lot of them since the neighborhood has a hotspot for refugees, and at the time, Afghanistan was doing really bad. He has scars covering his face and is balding on top. He couldn't have been too tall because he wasn't much taller than 6th grade me, so like 5'4" or 5'6". I spin back around and start to speed up, and I hear footsteps behind me quicken. By the time we get to the D-shaped driveway to my building, we were speed walking. Remember, it's broad day, and there are plenty of people around, and a man chasing a kid around is weird to anybody. As soon as we hit the split in the sidewalk which separates the driveway and the straight path, I start sprinting at full speed to my building. Luckily, there was someone buzzing in at that exact moment, and I slipped in the door behind him. I quickly whirl around and pull the pneumatic glass door shut. When I look up, I see the man, seconds too late, on the other side of the glass. The look on his face still scares me. He stared at me with an expression of anger I had never seen before, nor have seen since. I run to the elevators and push the button. He starts rattling the door. The expression on his face was still sinister. When the elevator comes, he understands that he won't catch me. He leaves the way we came. I live in a small town in South Africa. Near my town there is a large patch of woods, and since the outbreak of the virus, I haven't been in the woods for a long time. Until yesterday. So my friend called me to ask if I wanted to join him and a few other mates to play a game of paintball in the woods, and obviously, I was keen. I got my paintball gear and gun and headed off to my mate's place. There was 6 of us: Chase, Liam, Matt, Joey, Steven, and obviously me. We headed off to the woods but made a few stops to fill up on patrol and get some gas for the paintball guns. When we finally got to the woods, we parked the cars, got in our gear, and ventured out into the forest to find the perfect spot to paintball. Eventually we got deep enough into an area with sufficient cover and space to play a good game of capture the flag. We played a couple of games, and since it's winter, it got dark really quickly, but we planned for this and brought our flashlights and decided to play a couple of night games which is extremely hard, especially in the forest we were in. During one match, Joey and I decided to sit out because we were both tired and just needed a quick breather, and the others continued to play from a significantly good distance away from us. While we're chilling, I was rolling up a joint. Yes, I'm a pothead. And Joey went to go take a piss a couple of meters away from me. While I was busy rolling, I had the flashlight pointing towards myself since there was no other light to allow me to see what I was doing and around me. It was completely dark. I couldn't even see 2 meters ahead of myself because of how dark it was. Suddenly I heard footsteps coming my way, but I thought it was Joey, and I soon realized I couldn't see any light from his flashlight, so now I was more vigilant, but still relaxed, thinking he was trying to play a prank on me or something. But the footsteps stopped a few meters away from me, so I lifted up my flashlight and pointed it in the direction where I heard the footsteps, and scanned the area, but just saw bushes and trees, and I just thought it might be Joey hiding in the bushes or behind a tree, waiting to give me a jump scare. Then I heard footsteps coming in the opposite direction, and when I looked, I could see it was Joey because he was holding his flashlight. That's when I stopped what I was doing and picked up my flashlight and paintball gun, and when Joey reached me, I whispered, "Bro, I think there is someone over there." And Joey obviously didn't believe me and just said for me to stop being such a baby. But he soon regretted saying that because I decided to do one last scan of where I heard the footsteps, and to my horror, I saw someone peeking and staring right at me from behind a tree probably 10 or 11 meters away from us. I shouted, "What the fuck?" And when Joey heard me say this, he looked at me and then where the man looked, and instantly jumped up picking up his paintball gun also. We stared at each other for at least 2 minutes, but it felt like forever, until he stepped out from behind the tree. He was a large man, at least 6 feet, and honestly filthy like he hasn't taken a bath in years. He was wearing baggy ripped up jeans and just an old dirty zipped up bomber jacket. Plus we could see that he was on something, or he was just batshit crazy, and he was holding something behind his back. He finally said, "What are you guys doing out here when it's so dark?" We couldn't even answer him because of the shock we were in. Joey stuttered with fear in his voice. "We were just leaving." But the man nodded his head in disagreement and said, "No, you're not. Your friends are still playing the game." Felt a shiver down my spine. "How about we play a game of our own while we wait for your friends?" And that is when he showed us what he was hiding behind his back. It was a large machete. That's when I knew we had to get out of there. So I aimed my paintball gun, and in the toughest way I could muster up, I told him, "Leave now or I will shoot." Even though I only had about 6 or 7 paintballs loaded. And Joey did the exact same by aiming his gun at the man, even though he had no paintballs in his gun, but he didn't even flinch. Something that honestly made my skin crawl. He smiled and said, "The game starts now." And suddenly he rushed at us, so I told Joey to run while I fired my last shots at him. And luckily, I hit him in the head, which caused him to fall so that we had a chance to book it and link up with our friends. As soon as we started running, we heard his footsteps again and he was actually gaining on us. We could barely see, but we couldn't slow down because we knew what would happen if we did. So we carried on sprinting our hearts out until we heard other paintball guns being fired, so we knew we were close. Joey started shouting to get everyone's attention, and all of a sudden I heard a large thud. Joey tripped and twisted his ankle. I turned around to help him, and when I did, I could see the man running full sprint towards us. In that moment I thought it was going to be the end for us, but our friends heard our screams for help and rushed to us, and when they saw the man, they started firing at him, and he knew he wasn't going to be able to take us all on. He decided to turn around and disappear into the forest. We helped Joey up, rushed to get our stuff, and rushed to the cars. When we got to my friend's place, we helped Joey treat his ankle, and I proceeded to tell my friends everything that happened. Obviously, they were all creeped out. It's safe to say that the next time I'm in those woods, I'll be more vigilant. Since the moment I started working at this restaurant 6 months ago, the alleyway behind the restaurant has always given me an uncomfortable feeling. To gain a layout of this restaurant, it's located in the middle of nowhere, 5 minutes from the Mexican and US border, since we're located in the tip of Texas in the Rio Grande Valley. The alley itself is not located right behind the establishment. You must walk past its patio, then past our garage, until you reach the side back door that you have to prop open as the door locks behind you once it's closed. During the day, I'll usually see people walking back and forth across the alley when I go to take out the trash. It's typically a safe location, though it is also prominent for its homeless population. They're usually harmless, despite a few that are noticeably mentally ill. My colleagues have even gotten to know a few, and have given leftovers whenever possible. I work as part of the kitchen staff at this restaurant, and most of the time will work past 10 p.m. At night, my boss usually never lets the women take out the trash just to be safe, especially a petite, 5-foot, Hispanic, 28-year-old female. Anyway, since the quarantine started, our kitchen staff has become quite small, so I'll usually help take out the trash with one of the other men working. This night was pretty slow, and my fellow coworkers and I were encouraged to clean up and leave early. At around 9:45, I decided to get 2 of the slightly full trash bags and take them out back myself, assuming someone will see my actions and take the other 2 after me. As I walked past the patio to the garage, my gut began to fluster. I got to the back door and paused. Maybe you should wait, I told myself, but the smell protruding from the bags was nauseating. I pushed the door and propped it open with a brick we usually kept nearby. The alley was dark and silent. The air felt menacing. The only light illuminating was from the bulb above the door. I walked quickly to the bins and lifted up the top and dumped the trash. Then slowly a man stood up from the other side of the dumpster. He wasn't very big, but he looked a lot older. He was sweating, but his demeanor seemed agitated. He must have been crouching and waiting for some time. I jumped back, holding my hand above my heart that seemed to be pulsing through my chest. The man looked at me, eyeing me as my steps moved backward. He shook his head, motioning me to stop. He was far too close for me to outrun him. I looked at his bushy dark brows and dark black eyes. Most of him were still cloaked in the night that surrounded us. His clothes didn't look homeless, but I still assumed he was, since it's common for him to be out here at this hour, usually waiting for food. I told him I had no leftovers, but he shook his head again and took out a medium-sized knife. My eyes widened as I took in a breath. The following exchange took place in Spanish, but I'll translate. I don't have my purse. I was working. I'm still working. Just come with me, he said with his knife as a pointer. My mouth grimaced. Having no idea where this small amount of courage came from, I said, "My friend's coming over right now with the rest of the trash." "No, come now," he said more hurriedly and stepped closer, and I stepped back, speaking again with a little more tenacity. "They all saw me come over here. There's more trash and he's coming right now. He's outside right now. I just need to yell." "You're not going to scream. I'll gut you." To this day, I don't know what came over me, but I replied with, "Watch me." We looked at each other, daring each other. Then we both heard footsteps coming from inside the garage, and he ran past me. I stood there breathing again. I didn't know I was holding my breath. I turned to see my friend John come out the door. "We're almost done over..." He stopped after seeing my face. "What happened?" I explained everything as tears ran down my face. My friend decided to run down the alley to try to catch him, even though I told him not to. And that he's gone by now. It was about 5 minutes until he came back. John relayed to me that no one was around except for some homeless guys we were familiar with. He asked them if they saw anyone running from the alleyway, and they said yeah, but they didn't recognize the man. And he took off in the opposite direction towards the border. John took me back inside and told our boss what happened. They called the cops, whose station was pretty close by. They sent someone to patrol the area and gather a description from me, which I gave. My boss let me leave early and John walked me to my car. He told me it's too bad we don't have a camera back there. It would have been cool to see how I handled the guy. I smiled slightly, but my stomach was still in knots. He looked at me and apologized. I moved my hand to stop him and told him I'll be fine. Unfortunately, I still work there, but I've been excused from trash duty from now on. Obviously, they never found him. I don't want to think about what would have happened to me if I was more complicit. Something gave me the courage to argue back to him. And thank goodness that my friend came out just in time. When I was about 8 years old, my parents were going through a divorce, and me and my older sister used to spend a lot of time at our grandparents' house. It's long, ranch-style home on a corner in a very nice neighborhood that's a 10-minute walk from a gas station, grocery store, and a few fast food restaurants. The streets are long and lined with well-manicured houses, cradled by big, scenic California Valley hills all around. We were never very wealthy, but my grandpa bought it as a fixer-upper many years ago, and the property value has skyrocketed since then. As you can imagine, it's a very safe spot. And although there weren't many other kids in the neighborhood, it wasn't uncommon to see neighbors walking their dogs or pushing a stroller down the sidewalk outside our house. Although my mom was especially protective all our lives, this particular neighborhood was densely populated, and my family knew just about everyone who lived there. She grew up in that neighborhood herself, so she was understandably trusting. She would once in a while let me and my sister walk to the Rotten Robbie gas station on the other end of the block to grab a snack. I would always get a ring pop, and my sister would grab a Three Musketeers before we made our way back home. My sister was about 11 at the time, and this small amount of freedom was a really big deal to us. Nothing compared to walking down that street all by ourselves in the summertime, laughing and joking around, a couple dollar bills in our pockets. Felt like I owned the world. The one oddity I ever noticed around the neighborhood was a small camper parked on the side of the road opposite to the gas station, right along the backside of the fence of another house. It sat there in the shade like a permanent fixture, all the windows constantly covered by opaque beige curtains. I can't explain why, but it always gave me this deep sense of foreboding when I'd pass it. I was almost positive someone was living inside it because, at times, I'd hear the air conditioning running as it sat stagnant in that same spot. The hairs on my neck would always stand on end as I passed it, particularly as I passed the camper door, and I'd always keep an eye on it for the fear that one day it'd swing open just as I came to pass by. I think what bothered me the most was a drawing taped to the door from the inside. It was extremely messy. A sketch of odd lines and a brown-colored pencil that was frustratingly indiscernible. I could see the outline of something, a vague shape, but could never make out what it was intended to be. I never had the nerves to stop and stare long enough to really investigate, but each time I walked by, I'd steal a glance. A year prior to the incident I'm about to describe, I was walking with my mom past the camper in the shade. We had just gone to the park nearby and, unfortunately, had to pass the camper before we could cross the street and continue walking. I didn't want to seem afraid, so I kept on walking right behind her and didn't object when she walked past it. This time, I felt a little more brave. I was frustrated not being able to decipher the drawing for so long, and while my mom was feet away, I stopped in front of the camper door and took a moment to really look at the drawing. Upon closer inspection, the paper was filthy. I remember doing a project in elementary school where we soaked printer paper in black coffee to make it look aged, and that's what it reminded me of. My mom walked on without noticing I'd stopped following her, but my eyes stayed fixed on the indistinct mass of dirt-caked scribbles, until I could make out what looked to be a tiny, malformed face. My stomach turned. I immediately felt cold and disgusted as my eyes trailed over the rest of the image. I didn't know what kind of creature it was at the time, but now I can look back and say the drawing was a badly deformed fetus inside a mass of large, perfect circles like those made by a circular ring ruler. Its face was contorted as if in pain. It was so graphically disturbing, and seemed to portray this odd sense of suffering that stuck with me for days. As a child, I didn't know how to process it, and the mental image still makes me sick to think about. I'd never seen anything like it before. Adrenaline flooded my body, and my chest hurt with fear, but I selfishly thought of my glorious little trips for ring pops and said absolutely nothing as I followed behind my mom. This was, in retrospect, a classically terrible idea. It's one of those things you scream at main characters in movies for. Ever since my ill feelings towards the camper had been elevated by the drawing on the door, I thought about it every time we drove by. And about a month later, my mom once again graced us with several bucks and permission to walk down to Rotten Robbie and grab our respective snacks. I thought about telling my sister about what I'd seen on the way there, but she was older and braver, and I was terrified she'd make me cross the street with her to check it out. It was a bright, sunny day, and I told myself with false certainty that nothing was going to happen. If I didn't acknowledge it, maybe it'd go away. We walked past the camper, and it was thankfully uneventful. On the walk back, I was feeling more comfortable and was focused on fighting open my candy wrapper while my sister walked alongside me. We passed the camper a second time, but I didn't give it half as much thought as the first time. I don't remember what we were talking about, but I recall being interrupted mid-sentence as my sister softly yet firmly said my name. There was a distinct fear in her voice that immediately set me on edge, like a bucket of ice water. All my senses heightened, and I became aware of everything, including the sound of haphazard footsteps about 10 feet behind us. It was accompanied by a heavy rustling sound like a heavy backpack, and nervously, I half turned my head to look. A man with a long, unkempt beard, and wearing many layers of ragged clothing stood behind us, eyes unmistakably burning into our backs as he walked. His movements weren't normal. It was a drunken shuffle, like each of his feet were unimaginably heavy, and needed to be moved one grand effort at a time. His shoulders were skewed, head tilted downward with a strange arch of his neck. I could hear his shoes scraping the gravel with every step, but rather than seeming genuinely intoxicated, it was as if he was intentionally meandering our direction like a zombie with the direct effort to frighten us. Behind him, I saw the camper door was wide open for the first time in all the years we'd spent living there, and realized this was the man who had been living inside. "He's following us," I choked out, my eyes filling with tears. My mind was spinning as I stared straight ahead again, the wide street and sidewalks abnormally empty all around. My sister grabbed my hand. She squeezed it hard enough to hurt without looking my way, speaking carefully under her breath. On the count of 3, we race home. She told me in a very serious tone of voice. I couldn't reply through the growing lump in my throat, but every single cell in my body understood we had to put some distance between us and this man as quickly as possible. She began to count steadily while we walked faster, and the most terrifying part is that he started running before we even had a chance to. He must have heard her directions to me and tried to get a head start by sprinting our direction before she got to 3, but his footsteps were noisy and we bolted like deer the instant we heard him behind us. I'll never forget it. The chase felt exactly like you imagine in your nightmares. The fear your pursuer is inches away from grabbing your arm or a fistful of your hair. I pictured myself being dragged into the van with nobody around to see or hear me. We ran so fast we didn't even have the breath to scream, and peering back behind me, about 10 seconds later, I saw him running our direction with absolutely none of the impairment he showed with those zombie-like steps moments before. I think back on it now, and he may have been deliberately pretending to be handicapped to lower our guard so we wouldn't start running. The thought is terrifying, but I can't rationalize it any other way. We made it to our grandparents' house, and, without looking behind us, yanked open the stubborn old door before slamming it closed and scrambling past their excited dogs to get as deep in the house as possible. I don't even think we locked it, as our main goal was getting within the line of sight of any adults as quickly as possible. My mom was talking to my grandpa at the table and gave us an amused look when we bounded into the living room. Since we were kids, running around wasn't anything out of the ordinary, and she didn't ask what happened as we collapsed on the couch and tried to catch our breath. The inside of the house felt so safe, and felt in such good spirits that I didn't even want to bring up what had just happened. Like waking up from a nightmare you didn't want to talk about, I was desperate to go back to normalcy. I wanted to forget it entirely, to unwrap my candy and act like everything was completely normal for the sake of my own sanity. And that's exactly what I did. I asked my sister a few years back if she remembered this incident. I'm 25 and she's 28 now, and her response was strange. She remembered immediately without the need for me to provide details, but she quickly waved it off and insisted he had to have been a bored homeless man looking to spook some kids walking home with no real intent to harm anyone. I don't know. I'd like to believe it's some innocent misunderstanding, but like they always say about gut feelings, they're rarely wrong. I feel in my soul that he wanted to hurt me and my sister that day. I never told her or anyone else about the strange drawing on the door, and I'm not sure if my sister saw the open door and connected him to the camper or not. It's one of my biggest regrets, as I would hate for any other children to have been less fortunate after innocently walking past the camper in the shade. I believe he may have chosen the spot between the park and gas station deliberately, due to the number of children walking around the area. I never saw the camper again, a day or so after this. I'm not proud of how I handled this. and would encourage anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation to contact authorities immediately for the safety of others around. I don't know. Maybe this whole story comes off as melodramatic, but it was very real and very frightening in a way I can't forget. When I was a teenager, my older brother moved out and my parents both worked late, so occasionally, I would spend evenings by myself after school. We lived in the countryside a few miles outside of town and had a good collection of neighbors. The day went as normally as ever. I went to school, got home, turned on the TV, had a snack, and texted one of my friends who I had a crush on. It wasn't long afterwards that I noticed a man outside my house. He walked past a few times. He wasn't an ordinary person walking around the block. He looked scraggly and unkempt. I ducked as far as I could behind a chair, still trying to see him out of the living room windows, hoping he didn't see me. But soon he came to the front door and knocked. I was texting my friend the entire time, increasingly getting freaked out. As he knocked on the door, I stupidly went to answer. I had my phone on me with 911 at the ready. I tried to silently unlock the door to not alert the man. I opened the door a crack. There was a screen door separating myself and the man. I was ready to slam the door and lock it if anything happened. The man looked at me with crazed, paranoid eyes. He had a large dark beard and looked to be late 50s, early 60s. He seemed out of breath and his face drenched with sweat. He was larger too, more the reason to keep my guard. I sheepishly said, "Hello? Please, call the police. They're after me." He said in an exhausted smoker voice. He kept looking at the road and tensed whenever a car would occasionally pass. "Who's after you?" I asked, getting ready to slam the door. I barely escaped. They were right behind me. "Please, can I come inside?" At this point, I knew to call the police. "Just wait here. I'll get someone to help." My heart was in my throat at this time. I didn't know if this guy was then going to try to force open the door, so I quickly shut it and locked it. I ran to the back door and locked that as well as I called 911. My heart was racing and I could barely tell the operator my information, but they said they would send somebody out. It wasn't long until a patrol car arrived, but it felt like forever. The entire time I kept watching the man who then walked into my driveway, pacing nervously. The officer got out and proceeded to talk with the man, and they got in the car and left. I have no idea what happened to him, nor if he was telling the truth. He could have been drunk or crazy, but it was genuine fear in his eyes when I looked at him. Something truly scared him, and it scared me to think that there could be someone out there that wanted people for whatever reason. This happened about 2 years into our now almost 9-year relationship, and it still gives me chills when I think about it. My partner, Ron, and I had just pulled up to his mom's house after a date night, and we were in the middle of saying our goodbyes. For context, his mom's house used to be in a quiet, residential area surrounded by busy main streets and a random freeway entrance 2 blocks over. We were not parked more than 5 minutes when a man come running from the house next door up to our car with a flashlight, tapping on the passenger window, motioning for us to lower it. Needless to say, we were both a little freaked out as he appeared out of nowhere and refused to lower the window, especially considering we did not recognize him. He tapped harder this time, and Ron told me to just drive around the block until he went away. So I drove down the end of the street to put some distance between us and the man. That's when we see him jump into a car and drive full speed towards us. Panicked, I make a wide right turn into the main street, so that I am in the left lane. The dude does the same, except he pulls into our left in the middle of oncoming traffic. At this point, I'm hysterical, and Ron and I are trying to rationalize what is happening. When I catch a glimpse of his face, he seems so angry and I realize he's screaming something at us, but I can't make it out. So I make an asshole maneuver in front of the car on my right to dart down the next residential street. We thought we had lost him, but he came flying down behind us, only to pull up on our left again, screaming at us to get out of the car. While this is happening, Ron has the police on the phone trying to give them details about the car and the man driving. I, on the other hand, step hard on the brake and reverse it all the way back down the block to get away from the man. He must not have seen it coming because he seemed to stall for a minute. We were hoping that was the end of it, but he chased us down that street too. I realize the freeway entrance is only a block over now, so I hightail it, running a red light in the process, and pull onto the freeway at the last minute. In the rear view, we see him stop abruptly and stare at us while we zoom down the freeway. With the police on the phone, they explain that they'll send out a patrol to scope out the area for a car of that description. Not sure that ever happened. I drive until I was sure he wasn't following us, and we were far enough away from Ron's mom's house to call my parents. We pulled into a Rite Aid parking lot and waited for them to come get us while I am just crying hysterically. That night, my stepdad drove over Ron back to his mom's house, where they saw no sign of the man. The next day when Ron told his family what happened, they went next door to confront the neighbor about it, only for the neighbor to explain that they had no company over that night, did not recognize the car, and didn't know anyone of that description. A little about me. I'm a personal trainer, and I share a space in an office that also has an acupuncturist and a chiropractor. Usually they operate during the day, and I will go around 7 to 8 p.m. at night to work out and do heavy lifting so their clients don't have to hear metal clinking or banging in another room. As a preface, every once in a while the door will unlock and a cleaning person will come in. The door will chime, and they will clean and leave. The family that cleans the building is Hispanic. Usually a taller man who is very nice will clean our office, and a woman I assume is his wife will walk around with a trash bag and pick up the other buildings in the area. Tonight was the usual routine. Go to the office, drop off some paperwork, and squeeze in an evening workout. I'm putting away some stuff and printing off a few things, and I hear the door unlock. The door is older, and it makes a very distinct clink sound when the key turns in it. The door chimes, and a man comes in, asking me in Spanish if he can come in. I don't speak Spanish, and he repeats in English, "Can I come inside?" Of course, I think it's one of the members of the family to come clean, and I say yes. It isn't until 10 minutes later that I go to throw away something. I notice the trash is still there, and this man is just sitting in front of the door. I don't want to be rude, but I didn't understand why on a Sunday night at 8:30 p.m. this guy is just sitting here in the office alone with me. I text the chiropractor and tell her what's going on, to which she calls me immediately and says,
You need to leave. There's a button on the alarm to notify the police. Do you want me to come over?
I tell her yes, and I grab my stuff and approach the man. I tell him I'm leaving for the night and turning on the alarm, so you need to leave. He looks at me and shakes his head and says no very firmly. I freeze up, thankful that I still have someone on the phone. I say, "Why are you here?" He mumbles something along the lines of, "I'm on probation." I tell him that the office isn't for probation, and in my mind, I'm thinking why would someone be reporting to an officer at 8:30 p.m. on a Sunday? The office is holistic. We have Buddhas and incense around. It says Oriental Medicine on the door. He stands up and blocks the door. He starts asking what the office really is, and I tell him it's for an acupuncturist and other specialties. As I type this, I wonder why he cared to know. It wasn't for probation. Why would he care so much to know what the office was? I wonder if I made a mistake in telling him. He then pulls out his phone and begins to scroll through it. He says he doesn't know the address and maybe I can help him, suggesting I walk over to peer at his phone. I tell him I can't help him and he needs to leave. He scrolls for 5 minutes on his phone, and at this point I'm hoping the churro will get here soon. He holds his phone up at me and shows me a random list of 20 to 30 addresses. I tell him, maybe what you were looking for is across the street, but not here. You need to leave. He seems hesitant to leave, but finally turns around and walks out slowly. As soon as he gets outside, I lock the door. I guess it didn't matter because this man somehow had a key to get in, but I locked the door as soon as I could. It was only then that I noticed there was a van parked in front of my car outside. This man gets in the passenger side, so he isn't alone. I decide to wait until the car leaves before I get in my own car. The way they parked, it would only take them backing up 5 feet to box me into the space. The van is huge with suicide doors on the back, and it then proceeds to wait for 15 minutes before slowly pulling out. It stops in front of the office, as if they are taking one last look at the building and slowly pulling off. I wait, and notice that they have only pulled up 50 feet, just out of my sight. They're still there, and I can barely see the headlights. It's like they're waiting for something. Thankfully, the chiropractor pulled up in her car in time, and the van was gone. The whole experience was unreal. I can't seem to wrap my head around it. The fact that this man came in with a key and acted like he was there for probation doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense at all. The fact he wanted to know what the office really was, and he blocked the door, is also bizarre. A few weeks ago when I was moving equipment into the space, I felt like I was being watched. I ended up burning some sage and thought maybe I was just paranoid about being in a new space at night. But now I'm wondering if there was something I was picking up on, and didn't know it yet. I'll keep this updated as things progress. Hopefully that man doesn't come back in, and hopefully we get a security camera installed, and the locks changed. To preface this, I was young, maybe 18 or 19, and had no idea what we were getting into. So my father owns 3 businesses and was actively dating his business partner, and was providing for her. She also made advances on me, which kinda creeped me out. She would buy us all food, and at first, I was grateful. But then I started becoming nervous as she wanted to be alone with me a lot. My father ended up getting married, but didn't tell her. And she got really upset at him, and told me not to tell her. She came to my job and demanded to see my father, to which I told her he wasn't there. She screamed at me, and said we would soon regret it. Due to the disturbing nature of it, I called the cops, and all they did was take my name, but didn't actually look into it. So fast forward, I come home around midnight, as I had just come from my second job, dead tired from school and work. I ate and crashed on my bed. It had to be at least 3 in the morning when I heard my door open. At first I didn't move because I assumed it was my calico cat, Misty, pawing at my door, as she liked to sleep with me. When I groaned her name, and she didn't answer, it struck me strange, but I wasn't worried until I felt a presence standing over me. I quickly woke up and discovered my father's ex in our house above me with crazy eyes. She was screaming, saying how she would get her revenge on my father. I quickly rolled out of bed, ran past her, and called the authorities. She openly tried to fight my father's wife and tried to stab my dad. The police came and arrested her on the spot. That was the scariest thing I've ever been through, and I'm glad I won't see her again. Now I sleep with a blade next to my bed and a taser. Please be careful, as you never know who may pay you a late night visit. To really understand the story, or maybe how it happened, you need to know a few things. I live in Belgium, and at the time of the events, in 2018, I lived at home with my parents, my older brother, and my sister, and my sweet dog. Looking back now, maybe my dog is a bit too sweet. Also important to note is that my family is all over the place. Everybody is always busy doing something. Everyone has a very different rhythm, and some days, we live next to each other instead of with each other. So that is why at the time I didn't really know who was home and who wasn't. We do love each other. So in 2018, on a school night, I woke up to some noises in my room. I was confused and looked at my phone. It was around 3 a.m. You know that feeling when you wake up very abruptly and don't know if you're dreaming or awake? That was kind of how I felt. There's a streetlight right at my window, so even though the curtains were closed, I could still make out some silhouettes and figures. As I had just woke up and wasn't really thinking, I thought the silhouette I saw in my room was my older brother. I was sleep drunk, as you could call it, and started asking him what he was doing, but he didn't really react. I saw him walking towards my jewelry, and I asked him again what he was doing. Again, my brother didn't respond. I was still laying in bed and I began to feel angry because I had school the next day and had to get up early. And as you do with irritating siblings, I started to curse him out. Get the F out, I have school tomorrow. This time he looked at me, but again didn't say anything. He started to walk toward my handbag and started looking in it and taking things out. At this point I was just angry at my brother, and finally got out of bed. Mind you, the lights are still off. I walked towards him and asked again, "What the F are you doing? Get out." And I physically started pushing him slightly towards the door. Then he spoke. "Where's the money? Where's the money?" In this very strange, almost fake accent. And seriously, I started laughing it off. I still thought it was my brother. "Okay, I don't know if you're drunk or just being an asshole, but get out." By this time, we were almost at the door. I was still pushing him out. He left, and I closed the door. Finally, I thought as I went back to bed. But I started feeling unsettled. I got nervous and scared and started thinking it over. Didn't I smell cigarettes? My brother doesn't smoke. Why would he act so strange? So just to be sure, I texted my brother, "Where are you?" His answer made my heart sink to my knees. "I just left the gym. I'll be home in a minute." I immediately called him and frantically explained there was just someone in my room. I started crying as I was panicking and asking him what to do. He said to call the police and stay in my room. As the gym was really close to our home, my brother came home like literally a minute or two later. I was still upstairs on the phone with the police while I heard my brother yell a whole lot of curse words and "get out." At this point, I was in the upstairs hallway because my sister woke up and was standing there too. My father fell asleep downstairs on the couch, so when he heard my brother scream, he immediately woke up and knew something was wrong. He went to the downstairs hallway and saw my brother chasing the intruder. At this point, they were already at the front door. My brother managed to take a backpack from the intruder, but sadly he got away and fled. My brother did get a good look at him too. So, the police came and I was actually in shock. All this time my mother was asleep because she's on strong sleep meds. She woke up during the chase when my sister and I were standing in the hallway. I was crying and she came up to us. I frantically told her what had happened and she said, "No, little one, that was a very bad dream." That's one of the things we still laugh about today. While we were talking to the police, we had to describe the person. I told them exactly what had happened and how he looked. Due to the streetlight, I could see the clothes he was wearing. He had a hood on, so I didn't see his face, and when I was close, he always turned his back toward me. So I'm telling the police lady about his black pants and green hoodie. Then she abruptly stopped me. "Green? Your brother said light gray." That's the second time my heart dropped to my knees. There were two guys, not one. Both my brother and I were 100% sure about what we saw, so there had to have been two guys. They took a few iPads, phones, and wallets, but luckily my brother took the backpack where there was a lot more valuable things they didn't get away with. But the burglars were kinda stupid because we still had Find My on all our Apple devices, and they were still running. A day later, when we saw the location, my brother jumped in his car with my father while on the phone with the police. Really, my brother is a badass. Going to the gym at night, he's in the military, chasing intruders through the house. I wouldn't fuck with him. They waited for the police and they went in the house where the location of our devices were and found one guy. He was crying and covered in his own piss and puke. They arrested him and he confessed. He said he was high on drugs and it was the first time he ever did something like that. He was very panicky and crying the whole time. My brother recognized him as the intruder he chased, so that meant the guy who was in my room was still out there. The guy snitched on the other guy, but he was nowhere to be found. We all kinda got on with our lives. I was really scared. I slept with my lights on for more than a year, and every time I would wake up past 3 a.m., I couldn't go to sleep anymore. The intruder they caught went to jail for a year. He was a first-time offender, and is now in a rehab program. He has sent us a letter or two, with our consent, and we kind of feel bad for him. He was traumatized too, but half a year ago, we heard the second man was taken into custody. It was finally over. I mean, it wasn't as bad as the beginning, but of course, I still got scared sometimes. But now they finally caught the man who was in my room. What we found out was unsettling to say the least. Well, the dude that pissed himself didn't have a record before this happened. The dude who was in my room was a very experienced criminal. He had multiple possession charges, theft, drunk driving, and worst of all, assault and attempted homicide. The man I talked to, cursed out, and pushed out of my room at 3 a.m. was dangerous, and I'm very happy to be alive. This happened a few years ago, in my old one-person flat. I had a strange feeling that something wasn't right for a few days, like I was sure that food in the fridge was less than I put back the last time. I found pillows from my couch on the floor, stuff like that. I lived alone back then, so there wasn't anyone else with access to my flat, or so I thought. Well, one night I woke up around 1 in the morning, sweating, and even though I didn't remember, was sure I awoke from a nightmare. Since I was drenched in sweat, I decided to take a shower, so I put my phone up in the bathroom for music, turned on the water, and enjoyed my shower. A few minutes in, I heard the door move. I never close it, but it still never moves. I took a look at the shower curtain and saw a shadow against it. and a look at my phone confirmed someone was there, since I could clearly see a reflection in my screen that showed someone standing next to the shower curtain. It took me a lot not to scream, and to keep acting like I didn't notice anything, while silently taking the shower head off the holding and turning the water all the way to hot. I'm still kind of impressed of that quick thinking. Our water got really hot when you cranked it all the way to hot, and a few seconds later, steam was raising and the water hurt my eyes, flowing to the drain. I turned around, ripped the shower curtain open, and held the shower head right at the person behind. It was a woman. She screamed in pain. I whacked her in the face with the shower head and jumped out of the shower and ran to the door, taking the key out of the lock and locking it closed behind me. A little later, she started to bang on the door, but the door didn't give. Thank God for German quality work. I called the cops and went to the kitchen to get my big kitchen knife, just for safety. I felt like my throat was closing up when I saw it missing and realized there's only one place where it could possibly be right now. The police came and arrested the woman, who turned out to have been the former person living in the flat and was evicted for not paying rent. Seems she made a copy of the key and came into the flat when I was at work and sometimes at night. It's possible that what woke me in the first place was her, and honestly, I don't even want to think about it. Ever since then, I always insist that the locks are changed when I move into a new place. This happened last weekend. My state is still pretty much entirely shut down due to the virus. I am working as an administrative assistant for an organization. I've been working here since I was 16, 18 now. The office where I work is almost completely empty all the time, and it's really eerie from how it was pre-pandemic. The building shares a lobby with a hotel that has little restaurants, shops, art galleries, etc. Before the virus, it was a really lively, happening place all around the clock. So now most of the people in the offices are working from home, and the shops, for the most part, have either gone out of business or are closed. There's still one open coffee shop, but that's about it. So I usually work from home. But I needed the office space this time for things I had to get done. So I went into the office around noon, and it's like a freaking ghost town. Nobody else seems to be in this huge building, and the only sound is the normal lobby music echoing throughout the empty, lifeless building. I get in the elevator and go up to my office and begin work. However, I start to get this off feeling of not being alone in the office, and I get really creeped out. I check around the office and find nothing, and I go back to work. So it's around noon and I hear footsteps in the hallway. Because of the new virus rules, we have to sign in and out of the office in order to do contact tracing. I go into the front office to see if anyone signed in after me, and no one has. I tell myself I'm just being paranoid and get back to work. So I'm focused on my task again, and I hear a door softly shut. My heart starts beating really heavy, and I go back to the front office. No one else has signed in. I decide it's best for me to just leave right then and there, and maybe call my boss and ask him to come back with me to collect my stuff later. So I go down to the lobby, which is still eerie and empty, and I call my boss and ask him what to do because I left my work laptop in there. My boss tells me to do whatever is safest for me, and there is a security guard on duty, to go find him and ask them to walk me out of the lobby to my car and alert them of the issue. So I go to the security desk, and the guard there tells me he's been there all morning and has only seen me and one other person go in the elevators that day, but he didn't know what floor they got off on. I sat there with him for a while, and he sees a person get in the elevator at a floor below mine and leave. He tells me he thinks it's the noises I heard. It was probably just an echo from that person on the floor below me, but if I want, he'll go to the office with me. I tell him that's fine. I'm good. Fragile masculinity over here. And I go back to my office to begin work. I'm working and I again hear footsteps. I look down the hallway but no one is there. I decide it's not worth it for me to stay there, that I'm too freaked out, and I grab my stuff and head out the door into the elevators. It seems like an eternity waiting for the elevator to get to me. I feel like someone is watching me again, and I turn to look towards the office entrance. The next thing that happened freaked me out so badly I couldn't comprehend it. Lo and behold, a very tiny woman, like maybe 5'2"-ish, who I don't recognize, and doesn't work for the company, is peeking through the glass of the office door, and she is totally naked. She makes eye contact with me, and then runs back towards the back office until she is out of view. I'm stunned. It's literally the weirdest thing I've seen in my life. I jump in the elevator and press the lobby button and the shut door button as fast as I can. I go to the security guard and tell him what happened. He says it's impossible that anyone else was in there, because they keep a log of people leaving and entering which floor times, and no one else has entered my floor in 3 days except for my boss. I call my boss and tell him what happened, and he is sufficiently weirded out. Anyways, he, another coworker, and I decided to check out the office the next day together and find that someone had taken all the office snacks in the break room we find in our relaxation office. Office for when people are having a bad day and need a place to relax. A pair of socks and a brush with hair and dried flakes of blood on it, and a grocery bag filled with receipts, coins, and other random junk like thumbtacks, rocks, a small dollar store plushie, and used Q-tips with earwax. But we find no one in the office. So this happened around 5 or 6 years ago to my uncle. He works for a big company which has offices all over the country, so he has been transferred a few times. So this one time he was transferred to a big city. He rented a big truck to move his furniture and other household items. They finished the packing by evening and decided to start the journey by 7 p.m. in the night, so they can reach their destination by morning. My father was accompanying him, so they started their journey. By around 2 or 3 a.m., the truck driver slowed the truck a bit, so my uncle and my father asked what happened. He said that there is a lady standing ahead. She might be asking for help, and that we should check it out. My uncle said, "No, don't stop. We don't have time for all this. Just keep going." He insisted, but my uncle didn't let him stop. So when they reached their destination, he was a bit angry with my uncle and my father and asked him again why he didn't let them help the woman. Then my uncle said, "There was no woman on the road. We didn't see any woman standing on the road. You were the only one who could see her, but we didn't tell you this because, otherwise, you would have been scared, and that would have been bad with you driving, and we were on a highway in the night." The story I'm about to tell you happened yesterday night. I live in Nantes, West France. I'm quite a petite girl, and I avoid confrontation wherever I can. I'm pretty good at it because, since I can remember, I had a very strong sixth sense thing. I try to avoid people who make me anxious. It allowed me to survive some very dangerous situations and prevent one kidnapping, but that is not part of the story. Yesterday, I visited a very close friend of mine. A few days ago, she broke her leg, so I decided to cheer her up by giving her a few gifts. The atmosphere was so nice that I didn't recognize when it got dark outside. Despite the late hour, I decided to go home. I said goodbye to my friend and left her apartment. I was about 40 minutes from home, but I walked this distance many times without any problems, so I thought it would be the same this time. Oh, how wrong I was. Less than 5 minutes passed and I just felt it was going to be hell. I was approaching one of the many bridges in our city. I didn't see anyone around. I thought my senses were playing a trick on me. This has happened before, so I kept going. The bridge was about 20 meters in front of me before I heard a conversation and a giggle. I turned my head slightly and saw 3 men walking towards me. I felt a cold sweat on my back, but it was too late to turn back. I didn't want to show them that I was afraid. I know this type of behavior provokes more harassment. I kept walking, but turned the music down. I didn't take my headphones off because I didn't want them to know about my suspicions. I heard their footsteps behind my back. They were saying something, but I didn't know what, because they were speaking in a different language. I was already on the bridge when they caught up with me. As I said, I'm a petite girl. They were over 180 centimeters tall. They surrounded me. I had no choice but to go ahead. A shudder ran through my body. I didn't know what they wanted or what they were saying, but I felt like I was in danger. They kept talking to me. They leaned over me and whispered something into my ears, and they laughed. This sound will haunt me for the rest of my life. At one point, they noticed I was doing my best to ignore them, and then the worst began. They started making animal noises. It may sound strange and maybe even funny, but it was terrifying to me. They howled, growled, whistled, and kissed the air loudly. They did these things very close to my face. I was desperate, but where would I go? I was on the bridge. I would kill myself if I jumped into the water, or at least break both of my legs if I were lucky. Those 2 minutes to cross the bridge felt like an eternity for me. When we got to the end of the bridge, I was sweating, close to tears. Thought I was going to throw up. I was shaking, which seemed to amuse them even more. And then a miracle happened. Someone called my name, very loudly. I looked up and saw someone approaching us. He was a very tall man, several years older than me, but I didn't know him. I had no idea who he was or how he knew my name, but it didn't matter at the time. I felt like he was my guardian angel. He came over to us and staring profusely at the 3 strangers. I didn't see their faces, but they fell silent. "What are you doing with my girlfriend?" he asked, still frowning at them. He stretched out his hand in my direction, never taking his eyes off them. "Come on, sweetheart." I didn't wait. I didn't know who he was, why he was helping me, but I didn't care. I gripped his hand tightly and almost nestled against his shoulder. My heart was beating fast and loud, but I was so thankful that he came to help me. 3 strangers and my savior exchanged glances. They were silent. I was starting to panic that they would attack him because he was there alone, and I wouldn't have the strength to help him if they would attack. But it didn't happen. I almost heard their teeth grinding when they muttered something. My savior held my hand tightly and watched them. They turned back and went back on the bridge. We stood in the same place for some time. He looked at me and smiled, and at that moment, my body gave up. I started shaking uncontrollably, and I almost drowned in my own tears. He didn't say a word. He just held my hand and gave me time to cool down. After a long moment, he offered to take me home. We walked slowly and talked about various things. Actually, he was talking all the time. I was just nodding. I found out he was walking near the bridge and noticed the whole scene. He decided to react and help me if it turned out that his assumptions were correct. I asked him how he knew me and how he knew my name. He looked surprised and smiled and said he didn't know my name. He used this name because it's one of the most popular names in our country. When we got home, I was still shaky but happy. I offered him something to drink. I don't live alone, so I wasn't worried about letting him in. But he kindly declined, and we said goodbye. Can't believe how lucky I was. If I hadn't met him, I don't know if I could write about it today. So, thank you. Thank you so much for saving me. I hope to meet you one day. As to those 3 strangers, I hope one day you will understand that your behavior is reprehensible, and you will change your attitude to women who walk alone, and I hope to never meet you again.